afternoon, we are joined in by eminent guests and speakers for the event, and we are going to take up this very important issue of clean energy transition and just transition from various perspectives. I was hoping to welcome Mr. T.S. Singh-Deoji, but he's still joining in, who is our chief guest for the afternoon. But I will take this opportunity to welcome our two very special guests for the afternoon, Shri Amitav Kanji, CEO Niti Aayog, and Shri Anil Jainji, Secretary, Ministry of Coal, Government of India. Welcome, sir. We are also joined by eminent speakers in two of our panels, which will be followed by the inaugural session. And my colleagues who will be moderating those panels will be introducing our speakers at that time. Today's event, we are following a threefold. First will be the inaugural session, which is till 3:10 p.m. And then we have two panel discussions. The entire duration of the event will be about 3.5 hours. We might overshoot by 5-10 minutes, and I hope you all will bear with us. I would request during the course of the event, everyone to post their questions and comments in the Q&A box. We'll try to take as many questions as possible. Otherwise, we'll respond by email. I guess now we can start. So without further delay, I'm handing over the floor to Mr. Chandrabhushan, my colleague and President and CEO of iForest. Welcome, CP.
Thank you, Shrestha, and welcome Amitabhji, Anil Jainji, and I'm sure T.S. Singh-Deoji will join shortly. We have an excellent program today, and I'm happy that all of you have joined today for the release of this report. We think it is a very important report simply because it's a detailed study on-ground study in one of the biggest coal districts in the country to understand what just transition will mean for India going ahead in the future. Now, what I'm going to do in next 10 to 15 minutes is to give you a short overview of what we have found in Koba and what are the implications of this study on larger policy issue on just transition in India. In fact, many things that we have found in Koba also has resonance for many countries in Global South. This in many ways is an important study from the Global South perspective. We have colleagues from South Africa who have taken a lead in just transition debate. In the third panel, Dr. Crispin Oliver will talk about what South Africa is doing. But the way, the comparison of India and South Africa we have done, and we find that there are many similarities in the way just transition will evolve in the Global South in the coming decades. So people are waiting to hear actually our special guest and chief guest. So let me quickly start my presentation and give you some detail what we have found in our study. The first question that came to our mind was, how do we define just transition in India? This question was important because if you look at the dominant debate that is happening at the international forum on just transition, it is largely about formal workers and formal economy. Just transition debate was started by labor union whose demand were related to substituting and compensating workers from the fossil fuel industry. And this became the dominant debate in the global north and is still at the international platform, whether you look at UNFCCC or many platforms or other platforms. Just transition is about taking care of formal workers of fossil fuel industry. But we quickly realized that India's realities are very different. And I'll give you 4 points how we are different from the just transition debate that is happening in the global north. First, our coal district, especially our coal districts, are mono industry districts. We did a lot of research to see if there are coal regions with so much dependence on coal, and we found none. Even in Poland as well as in the US, there are hardly any region that can compare with Indian coal region as far as dominance of coal in the economy is concerned. if you look at the top coal districts in India, most of them have more than 40% of their GDP coming from coal and coal-related industries. This is very, very unique story of our part of the country, which means that other sectors of economy has not developed well. Koba, for example, has 60% of its GDP coming from coal and coal-related industries, coal thermal power plant and other industries. So that's the first reality. The second reality is we are an informal economy. In fact, for every one formal worker in fossil fuel industry, we have 4 informal workers. This was an analysis we did last year, looking at the cross-sectoral architecture and impact of just transition in India. And we found that informal workers dominate the fossil fuel industries like other sectors in India. The third reality is our coal districts are poor districts. They are not economically well off. In fact, Niti Aayog has just published its report on multidimensional poverty. You take the coal map of India and you superimpose the multidimensional poverty map of India, and you are likely to get the overlap. In fact, most of our coal districts are also the poorest districts. And the last reality is that the energy transition is going to change the energy geography of India. This is from where energy comes in India. The central and eastern India provides the bulk of domestic energy resources. But this is where renewable energy is growing. Renewable energy is growing in southern and western part of India. And it has implications on federalism. We need to understand what implications it has, but the energy map of India will change in the next few decades because of energy transition. Now, if you put all these 4 realities together, then the definition of just transition has to be completely different than the dominant narrative of global north, which is formal worker. In our case, just transition has to be about structural changes. It has to be about socioeconomic development. And therefore, the framing has to be that of a development intervention. It is not only about providing alternatives to fossil fuel worker. It is actually about changing the economic structure of the coal-dependent regions, where coal, as I said, dominates the economy. And therefore, restructuring of economy, improving socioeconomic and environmental conditions, and then which will lead to decent work opportunities for workers, is what the framing of just transition in India will be. Now, if this is the framing of just transition, then what it would entail. And this is what Koba study details out. The study is an in-depth study based on household survey, focus group discussion to understand the nature and extent of dependency on coal, to understand alternatives, to assess risk and resilience of the district, and then to develop a just transition plan, an indicative just transition plan.
Volume उनका नहीं आ रहा.
Now, for those who are not familiar with Koba,
यहीं पर वो स्क्रीन पे देखेंगे नीचे वॉल्यूम, वो जो एक ब्लैक कलर का स्ट्रिप है,
हाँ,
उसमें राइट तरफ वॉल्यूम का वो बटन होगा.
Arvind Neetam ji, if you can mute your...
सबसे ऊपर जो स्ट्रिप है ब्लैक कीबोर्ड पे,
volume, zoom, webinar.
Okay, let me give you. Let me give you some detail about Koba. It has a population of about 1.37 million. It is a reasonably urbanized district. 40% of Koba lives in urban area. It is a Schedule 5 district with 40% scheduled tribe population. It is a heavily forested district with 2/3 of its geographical area forested. And as I said, it is an aspirational district with 32% of its population being multidimensionally poor. The coal economy is big. It is the biggest coal producing district. India's 2 biggest coal fields, Korba and Hasdev, are in this district. It produces 16% of India's coal, and this production is going to peak at about 80 million ton by 2025 with the plans that Southeastern Coalfield Limited has in the pipeline. It has 8 underground and 5 open cast mine, but 95% of coal, and this is the Koba story, 95% coal comes from 3 mines, 3 big mines, Gevra, Kusmunda, and Deepika. Rest of the mines produces very little. And the remaining mines are also loss-making mines. It also has 11 thermal power plant with about 6,500 megawatt capacity. So what have we found? The first finding is that there is large dependence on coal. Not a big news, but nevertheless, 1 in 5 workers are directly dependent on coal, power plant, and coal transport, which is about 87,500 jobs. Just for comparison, the total formal worker in coal industry in the US is about 60,000. So this is the way to contextualize how high the dependence is on coal in this district. The second finding is that informal workers are about 60%, which is less than what you find in district of Jharkhand, where the informal workers are about 80 to 90%. So Koba has about 40% formal worker working in coal and coal-related industries. And these are the best paying jobs. The formal jobs are the best paying jobs. The other finding is that the dependence on coal is highly concentrated in about 25 square kilometer area. This is where all the mines and thermal power plants are, and the rest of the district is dependent on forest and agriculture. That's where the poverty is. So you have coal economy, which is a concentrated pocket of development, and then rest of the district is where agriculture and forest related livelihoods dominate. Economy is concerned, as I said, it is a mono industry economy. Other sectors of the economy have not developed very well. And therefore, Koba is highly vulnerable to disruption in the coal economy. There's nothing else there. So if there's disruption in the coal economy, it will have huge socio-economic implications for the district. And Koba provides huge amount of revenue to the state and central government. Every year, currently, it provides about $1 billion. Coal mines in Koba provides at least $1 billion in revenue to the state government and central government, which includes royalty, DMF, CSR, and coal cess. And I'm not including taxes. If you include taxes, these numbers are going to be very high. So actually, one of the poorest districts in India provides some of the highest revenue to the state and central government. As far as coal phase down and coal industry is concerned, we found that Koba will start facing transition challenges very soon. One reason is its coal fleet is very old. Nearly half of the thermal power units are already more than 30 years of age, and they are slated to retire by 2027 as per the time frame of Central Electricity Authority. And even the latest plant will reach the age of 25 by 2040. So if we plan a transition framework, then all the thermal power plants in Koba, if we do not add any new ones, will phase down by 2040. As far as coal mining is concerned, they will start facing production decline from 2030 onwards. The big mines, who are producing 90-95% of the coal, have limited life available. Gevra and Kusmunda, for example, have a remaining life of just 15 years. And all other coal mine in Koba will also exhaust their resources very soon. So both coal-based thermal power plant and coal mines in Koba will have pressure of the new emerging renewable energy, but they will also have, they are also facing aging as well as resource exhaustion problem. That is what is there in Koba right now. How do we plan transition? Obviously, we have to do many things to transition this economy. We have put out 5-point agenda for transition, which includes restructuring of economy, repurposing of land and infrastructure, revenue substitution, reskilling and skilling of workforce, and responsible social and environmental investment. Koba will require huge amount of investment in social and environmental infrastructure to build resilience of its community. Fortunately, Koba has these options. Its agriculture, forestry, and fisheries sectors are least developed. These can be developed to diversify the economy. It has significantly high renewable energy potential of about 8.5 gigawatt, which can be maximized, as well as the tertiary sector can be developed. So we have detailed out how the economic restructuring can happen in Koba. The most important thing will be repurposing of land and infrastructure. Koba has about 27,000 hectares of land with coal companies and coal-based thermal power plants, and these will get decommissioned. How do we utilize this land and infrastructure and build a new economy is going to be very, very important. We have done analysis of big mines, and we find that the potential for repurposing exists for all the mines. They can be converted into tourism spots, land can be reclaimed for industrialization, as well as built up area can be repurposed. So repurposing of land and infrastructure is another important component of transition planning in Koba. The good news about Koba is that it has an aging formal workforce, which means that the workforce can be retired as we close down the mines. 70% of workforce of SECL and NTPC are in the age group of 40 to 60 years. And their retirement can be synchronized with plant and mines. And therefore planning for transition of workers must start now. As far as informal workforce is concerned, they can only be absorbed by diversification of the economy. And therefore, for formal worker, pension and retirement is going to be an issue. And for informal worker, reskilling and re-employment is going to be an issue. Another important issue will be how do we build new skills for the new economy? That is another aspect of transition that we have to think about. Lastly, revenue substitution. As I said, Koba provides huge amount of revenue to state and central government. It is going to peak at about $1.5 billion by 2025. And this can be carefully planned by economic diversification. If we start the process of economic diversification, then revenue substitution can be taken care of. Lastly, investment in social and environmental infrastructure is extremely important. Koba is a severely polluted area. A huge amount of investment will be required in decontamination, reclamation of mines and plant. And under aspirational district program, already investment is going in healthcare, education, and other social infrastructure. How do we finance and implement just transition? Well, our recommendation is that we have to think completely differently as far as institutional arrangement is concerned. The current district administration is not designed to implement restructuring, and therefore we have to think about National State Commission for Just Transition and a special purpose vehicle at district level to implement just transition. Coal and power companies will have an important role to play as far as repurposing is concerned. Financing is important. We will need both international cooperation and national cooperation for just transition financing. And if coal cess can be diverted for financing just transition, then financing problem can be solved to a large extent. In next 30 years, if coal cess continues at the current rate, Koba will have $20 billion available for transition financing. So as far as financing is concerned, we have to see how the existing taxes on coal can be diverted for just transition finance. Let me end by giving you some key takeaways. I think the first key takeaway is that India's biggest coal and power district will face transition challenge not only because of renewable energy, but also because of exhaustion of coal resources and aging of coal fleet. So there will be a combined impact of these three things on India's biggest coal and power district. Coal phase down will have implications on federal relations, growth and development that we need to study carefully. We have 2 to 3 decades to implement this transition. we will require significant policy reforms on land, labor, as well as corporate law, which we are working on as far as just transition is concerned. And lastly, we have to view just transition as a redevelopment agenda. So let me thank all of you for listening to this presentation. And this ends my presentation for today. May I now request Anil Janji for his intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandabhushan. It's a privilege to speak here. The presence of Shri Amitabh Kant, and we have a galaxy of panelists and chairs, international panel, and I'm delighted to be here. So very quickly, perhaps coming from the coal sector, I look upon you, Chandabhushan, as a friend. In fact, when I moved from Environment Ministry to this ministry, I lost most of my professional friends. So coal needs support, even while it is phasing down. And your study, more than anything, brings out that, if you drive through Jharkhand, because coal has been there for 100 years plus, and mines get exhausted, they have finite resources for 20, 30 years. So you will see ghost towns, something on the lines of what you see in movies in the US, where mining towns, once mining got over, infrastructure got left behind, people stayed there until they found alternate locations. And that infrastructure is often just intact and dilapidated and breaking down. So while the talk of energy transition is happening in the world, concerns of just transition are very right, and I congratulate iForest for having started this exercise for the rights of the local people and to make sure that there is no social tension and there are no stresses on so many stakeholders, which your study has rightly brought up. I wanted to speak basically on three main strands of thought. Let me introduce the three and then we will go into them in some detail. That this entire process of energy transition and just transition, it needs a strategic approach. It cannot be in a chalta hai attitude. And you rightly brought out in your implementation slides how planning and creation of separate organizations, the funds that you spoke of, the coal cess has been imposed through a constitutional intervention. It's meant for a certain purpose. If it has to be used for this purpose that you highlight, then there'll be changes required in the statute. So this entire thing needs a very scientific approach, also because there's a strong human aspect to this entire problem. The second set of my observations will be that, coal mining and related assets like thermal power plants, the railways, evacuation methodologies, washeries, in some way, not too many though, they are owned by corporate entities, be they PSUs or be they, private sector. So as and when their demand diminishes, they will vanish. They'll protect their balance sheets and their investors' capital, they'll vanish. So ultimately, this baby will be left in the hands of the government. So, we need to be very careful because after all, the public finances of India are also stretched. So political leadership and bureaucracy will have to start thinking about it right away. And the third strand of thoughts, let's not be very despondent. A very large human and physical infrastructure exists in these belts. Some of the earliest origins of the industry, just like the Industrial Revolution came up in the UK, in the Great Britain, due to when the steam engine came up and coal could be harnessed in deploying machinery. Similarly, in India, Charia, Dhanbad, Tata Nagar, all these came up 100 years back. So a lot of resources do exist. which we can deploy in the right earnest for the problem at hand. Going in for a deep dive, nobody could have brought it out better in this study that a place-based approach is the answer to the problem. Because the coal mining areas exist in 7 states. Nagpur area is close to the cities. But if you go to Chhattisgarh, if you go to the Koba district, you went very far from the biggest city of the region, which is Raipur. So what are the opportunities in the linkages of these areas with the urban headquarters will vary. So it will have to be a bottoms-up approach. Energy transition will precede just transition. So, a good modeling approach, we don't want to start winding up coal before we have been able to put alternate means of energy sources in position. So this will also call for some good energy modeling and energy thinking through. We do have some time on our hands, thanks to the position which India took. We have time till 2070. It may not, coal economy may not last that long. But since we have time, we cannot, rest on our roars. Some kind of a phasing, first phase, second phase, third phase, take up some districts. Probably those districts or those coal mines which are going to deplete first, or those coal mines which are most expensive to produce, high stripping ratio, they may be available for a transition approach much earlier. The assessment of the problem, tribals, what are their incomes, what is the infrastructure, social infrastructure, health, education. Niti Aayog has already done a fantastic job over the last 4 years of the aspirational districts under the leadership of the CEO. So I guess a lot of work has already been done. And a similar strategy like the one adopted for that program can actually be transferred to this strategy. And you have mentioned it in your report in many places. Now, coming to the second strand of thoughts about, what liability, how will the liability be distributed? Today, the coal economy has got private sector. We have opened it up for commercial mining. Lots of coal-based industries are owned by private sector. Public sector is also there. They have resources, but they don't have infinite resources. So who will get the bill? That has to be thought through. Otherwise, you might have, government's budget heavily weighed down this responsibility. India has a long history of presence of public sector in the energy business as a whole. Now, coal itself, for that matter, about 75% of India's coal is produced by Coal India Limited and Singareni Coalfield, namely Lignite, which are all public sectors. So, 75% of the problem does devolve on them. This tells me that the government will have to be very careful. The second thing is that the ordinary man in these areas, even the intelligentsia, the media, the leadership may feel that, the coal transition is happening due to an international obligation which government of India has entered into, which actually is not very true. Let me tell you that the economics of renewable energy will itself impact and drive out fossil fuels. But as of now, there may be a thinking in the mind of the people that it's the government which has landed us into this situation. So it is for them to address our problems. My third strand of thought is that the present day laws on post-mining liability, let us say the EC and the FC regime, or the mining plan that we approve, all of them, they only talk of, brick and mortar. They do not talk of the people. So if a mining comes to an end, the mining plan says, how will you close the mine? How will you dump the OB back into the landfill? How will you pay for, compensatory afforestation? But there is no liability that you took the land, you disempowered the people, you took away the agricultural land. So that is also something which will have to be probably built into the commitments of the mining community. So these are some of the things which make me think that the government will have to do a larger share of the weight. And thirdly, just like a typical in the movie, we must come to a happy ending. To my mind, these areas are full of resources, physical and human resources. You just spoke of Koba and the three large mines, Gevra, Dipka, and Kusmunda. And you mentioned that the total mining area involved in that is about 20,000 hectares, 200 square kilometers. I remember as a young officer, I had once spoken to the Secretary of Industries in Government of India, and he had told me that, Madhya Pradesh, where I served for many years, is full of land. So he told me that why don't you find good large chunk of land? And he told me that if you get me vacant land of 20,000 hectares, I will bring you the MNC you name. I can bring you Boeing, I'll get you X, Y, Z. So today in India, because of high density of population, land is a scarce commodity. I think land is the largest asset, and you have devoted one of your slides on which category of the land which will become available and be put to which use. So that is one. The second is that these regions have seen capex, capital deployment, for over 100 years. Even now, every time we do a mine auction, we tell you how much money is going to come to the states, how much capital will be invested to bring these mines into operation. Even today, every year, all put together, at least $7 to $8 billion is being spent in these very areas. So the kind of physical infrastructure that has been created, we give housing to every coal worker. So there's housing, there are roads, the real infrastructure is really being ramped up. From 600 million tons of coal India's production, we are going to 1 billion. So the railway ministry is in concomitant investing evacuation methods. There is power generation you spoke of, I think 6 gigawatt of power generation capacity in Koba. In Singrauli, it's probably 15 gigawatts in those two districts of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. So these can be building blocks for a new industrial economy. What about green growth? And these are also the regions which have got a very high level of human capital, skilled, industrious people. Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand have customarily been sources of migration for workers going out to Punjab, Haryana. We saw that when pandemic, happened, such large, train loads of people coming back. So they have all the ingredients. So, but you brought out in your presentation the energy geography. Very interesting. All the solar and wind is happening elsewhere, and all the energy infrastructure is being stripped are elsewhere. Why don't we bring solar to these regions? We are working hard to bring large amounts of solar assets to Coal India's mines. So maybe that will give an initial impetus. So with these three large sets of thoughts, I feel that all it calls for is putting the dots together and crossing the T's. These are, and let's not forget, these regions are already poverty endemic areas. So, I would like you maybe to do a sequel or to maybe from your data call out and also share with us. These are poverty areas, but not because of coal mining. I don't know. I have not heard you say that. But, Arvind Netamji is here. I worked in a region when I started my career in Bastar. He was our MP, 1987-88. So these are already areas which are poverty stricken. And you said that if you put the map of the aspirational districts and the mining areas, they seem to overlap. So if coal vanishes, it doesn't mean that, coal vanishing will bring further poverty. It will bring further poverty, but these areas anyway need special attention. And after coal, they'll need even a more part of the attention. So the entire thing, to my mind, with so much competency that exists in the state government, you have, an officer from Chhattisgarh speaking to us. All of us have worked in these areas. Niti Aayog actually has got loads of experience. And in the recent times, the championship we have provided to cooperative federalism. So this is the true need of the hour, that the competencies of the state government and the knowledge that we have in Delhi and other places, think tanks like yours and others, we need to very strategically plan this transition. The biggest threat which people notice is lack of capacity to deliver, a just energy transition. So even if all that money is brought in, even if all this knowledge like you have brought in, Koba template, which could be replicated across other districts, to harness all that knowledge into, a just transition scenario, that capacity, I have all the confidence that we can put it all together, and your study, gives a direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anilji. I think T.S. Singh Deo has joined, and Amitabh Kantji is also here. So we can release the report now. So may I request everyone to put on their camera, and then we can release the report.
Am I visible, Chandrabhushan ji?
Not yet, sir.
I put on the video as well as the audio.
Yeah.
Yes, you're visible now. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So
your report.
No, still not. I think it's still not.
Anyway, let's
just go ahead with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anil Jainji is opening the report. Let's give a minute.
Sorry?
Anil Jainji is opening the cover.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So may I now request Amitabh Kantji for his remarks?
Mr. Singh Deo, my distinguished colleague, Mr. Anil Jain, Mr. Chandrabhushan, let me first congratulate International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, IFOREST, for this path-breaking work and the release of the report on planning a just transition, a district-based approach on India's coal and power districts. We are all aware that a coal phase down has become necessary in the face of pressing concerns of climate change and to save our planet, as we don't have multiple planets. The growth and cost competitiveness of renewable energy, backed by necessary policy support, has provided a huge amount of impetus for a shift towards clean energy sources for meeting our energy needs and development goals. India has taken a leadership role and has an ambitious plan to scale up renewable energy in the next 10 years. We have the onerous task of ensuring energy justice and clean energy access at affordable prices in the country. This would help to improve the lives of people and reduce carbon footprints. This report by IFOREST clearly highlights the aspects of local communities' reliance on coal mining and coal-based sectors, as well as the possible consequences of an energy transition and opportunities for alternative job creation, economic diversification, and revenue replacement. The IPCC has recommended a phasing out coal-based power plants by 2050 and adopting a system transition in electricity generation, largely relying on renewable energy sources. This has already been taken up in global discourse, where the contribution of coal to global electricity generation has reduced from 40% in 2010 to 36.4% in 2019. India has announced that by 2029-30, the share of renewables in the total installed electricity capacity will be 500 gigawatts, which will be nearly twice the coal and lignite-based thermal power sources. India has large coal reserves as a national resource, whereas to promote and be more dependent on renewable energy sources, India needs certain rare earth minerals for extracting and consuming renewable energy responsibly, which currently depends on other countries as well. A large proportion of our informal workers with low income are dependent on the coal mining and its related activities. Hence, the people have an insufficient adaptive capacity for any abrupt and unplanned closure at mining activities. The need to phase out coal therefore requires a detailed analysis and deliberative approach to avoid socioeconomic disruption in the coal sector. This study is a very important study. Actually, this can become the template in terms of impact on jobs and livelihood, revenue, and other social sector investments. The energy shift will have consequences for coal-dependent districts and states. Just transition has arisen as a concept around the world to ensure that coal-dependent towns and regions do not suffer as a result of the phase-out of coal. It emphasizes the importance of planning the transition to clean energy systems and low-carbon economy in such a way that net positive economic, social, the economic, social, and environmental results are achieved. I entirely agree that a strategic plan needs to be developed in the immediate future to prevent the haphazard closures of mine and socioeconomic disruptions. And the policy should include components of coal phase-out strategy at the national and state level, coal-based power phase-out plan and simultaneous incentivization of clean energy, regulatory revisions of the coal industry about mine closure and reclamation, lease transfer, labor, etc. The challenge is that the renewable energy costs have dropped over the past 10 years due to improvements in product design, manufacturing efficiency and capacity, economies of scale and policies such as tax credit, feed-in tariff, and renewable portfolio standards. As a result, the levelized cost of energy of new renewables has become cost competitive with and quite often cheaper than traditional fossil fuel power sources globally and across most regions. In 2019, more than half of utility scale renewable capacity additions achieved tariff lower than the cheapest new coal plant. The decline in renewable and storage prices is expected to continue. Improved digitalization and energy efficiencies are helping to address the intermittency of renewables and modernizing the energy system. To ensure a just transition, countries should stay ahead of the curve. And India must do that, particularly the states where there are coal reserves, and manage the risks of stranded assets, fiscal instability, and job losses. In gas importing regions like Europe, China, and Japan, for example, the cheapest new build peaking technology is battery storage. To reach the net zero by mid-centuries, countries need to rapidly phase out coal by 2030 in EU, OECD, 2037 in non-OECD Asia, and 2040 in the rest of the world. The net zero targets announced by major G20 countries indicate a turning point for international climate politics, and there is hope that the US under new leadership will contribute to more ambitious action. Several opportunities exist in G20 countries to increase international action to move beyond coal in 2022 and beyond. India is the only country which has maintained 2-degree climate pathways amongst the G20 nations. We are also cautious about its clean energy transition pathways. Coal, being the major share in the energy basket, needs greater efforts from all the actors to reduce its share in the energy mix. We are doing a lot of work to ensure that the just transition is both smooth and is citizen friendly. I entirely agree that the informal workforce will be impacted most, which is nearly 4 times the formal workforce. The informality is particularly high in sectors such as coal, steel, cement, and fuel retail. And majority of such workers are low skilled, have poor education, and earn low incomes. As energy transition will have 3 primary types of impact on the workforce, as mentioned by Mr. Chandrabhushan. These have to be addressed through appropriate transition planning. And therefore, it's very important that we increase retraining and reskilling requirements for the existing workforce due to changes in production processes or repurposing of facilities and scaling of the new workforce to meet the requirements of new low carbon industry, to help achieve a net zero through transition. So what will just transition entail? And to my mind, just transition in India will necessitate a development intervention to minimize negative impacts of an energy and industrial transition on the fossil fuel dependent states, districts, workers, and the local community. And this would require, to my mind, based on our experience of the aspirational districts, we would suggest that we need a restructuring of the economy and industries. We need a repurposing of the land and infrastructure. We need a reskilling of the existing and skilling new workforce. And we need a revenue substitution and investment in just transition. We need very responsible social and environmental policies. Now, this would require us to do a lot of hard work. This is not an easy job. This is a very tough job. Fortunately, this report by Mr. Chandrabhushan and his team of iForest lays down the model for one district for a just transition and for a district which is India's biggest coal and power district. It gives us a lot of lessons. It gives us a lot of lessons for the future and what the country needs to do in other districts, what the country needs to do in coal-rich states. Because these are also states where there are huge challenges of education, health, malnutrition. These are states where we need to accelerate growth so that India can grow at high rates. It's not possible for India to grow at high rates unless Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, UP grow at high rates of 9 to 10%. And therefore, these states have to become the backbone of the new model of economic development. But fortunately, these states also have huge resources for renewable energy. These are states which can take the leadership in many new areas of growth, in food processing, in a vast range of new technologies of the future. And to my mind, that is where we must handhold them. That is where we must assist them. That is where we must support them. That is where we must help them to build a vision of the future. And that is where I think Niti Aayog will work in partnership with the Ministry of Coal to assist and support all these districts and these states to lead India into the future. Without these states being leading partners, without these districts being major players, we will never be able to undertake a just transition. We will never be able to undertake the goals that we have set out for ourselves for 2070. We will never be able to achieve the Panch Amrit which Honorable Prime Minister has laid down before us. And therefore, it is incumbent upon all of us to work in very close partnership. We are partners in progress. We believe in cooperative and competitive federalism, and therefore we will be very delighted to work in partnership with the iForest to take this Koba plan forward for implementation. And we will take forward many other districts in close partnership with the state and the district administration and assist and support them in their endeavor for a just transition of the future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let me once again congratulate iForest and Mr. Chandrabhushan for this wonderful study. It's a remarkable study and I greatly appreciate his effort.
Thank you, Amitabhji. Thank you very much for the kind words. May I now request T.S. Singh Deoji for his remarks.
Thank you, Chandrabhushan ji. I would like to thank you so much for making me part of this very esteemed panel. I don't know if I fit in, but you made me be present. So thank you so much for that. I would like to pay my regards and say hello to Amitabh ji, Anil ji, S.K. Pal ji, Arvind Netam ji too, and the other panelists who are present. I got a copy of your report before we released it today. And I'll share without hesitation that I felt I was reading what I think. So thank you so much for putting all those thoughts, all those realities into words for us all to see in a more visible fashion. We talk about these things, but when it's time to act, I do feel that what is now being talked about in terms of just transition is where we usually fail. It is the justice and the injustice part that we need to redress foremost. As far as the other issues are concerned, that our planet Earth is choking, these are no longer matters to discuss upon. They are givens. They are givens that if we do not take rapid action, the Earth will choke. We will be responsible for that, and we need to take steps to ameliorate a situation we have maybe unthinkingly, with lack of foresight, created for us and for the future generations, whether it is the health issue, whether it is the environment issue, whether it is the current levels of whether it is manganese in the air, whether it is the PM 2.5 particle in the air, whether it is lead, or whether it is nickel, or whether there are all these other byproducts of not deeply thought out actions we have taken for our immediate goals of development. We are saddled with all of these issues today, apart from a just transition. So while we are in a situation where we have picked up goals, we have vocalized our commitments to the international community, whether it is 2030, whether it is 2050, whether it is 2070, how we will do it with justice to the inhabitants of those regions who would be being scaled back on the developmental ladder, who will be suffering job losses in the name of saving the world, who have not been given their rightful share of natural resource values, a base on which these states in the first place were created. Amir Dharti ke Garib Log was one of the catchwords vocalized by some of our leaders in the past. So these states which are known to be rich in natural resources and who are known to be way down in the development ladder, which are known to have the highest levels of BPL families in the country. Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh have been competing with each other as for the Reserve Bank data. We have been around 40% BPL families in these two states. Sometimes Jharkhand pips us by a couple of decimal points. Sometimes Chhattisgarh unfortunately goes ahead on those criteria. And yet we are seeing and talking about the largest producing district in the country, Koba. We are talking about Koba, who is providing the largest amount of coal to the country. I think it is around 16% or something. So that amount of coal being provided by one district, which has a BPL percentage of 41%, in itself, I think tells us the true story of how we have been planning our development, how today we are talking about just transition, where in the past we have not been just in developing the living standards of the population from whom or from whose geographical area we are extracting this natural wealth. So I don't want to sound parochial. I am a little sad because I am from that region and I have been seeing the use of these resources in the name of development of the country, where somehow the development of the country doesn't or hasn't given equitable thought and equitable opportunities to the people living in that geographical area. These are part of the planning processes we have adopted. These are the parts of the developmental models we have adopted. This is the way we have gone ahead. What has gone by has gone by. Time is not to talk about that. But today, if we are talking about an equitable or a just transition, and we are putting on record, Chandrabhushan ji, you and your team have put on record the loss that just this district will have in terms of revenue numbers. We were going through these numbers, the production of coal about 156 million metric tons annually. And we were seeing that the way this wealth is shared has been unjust for this region, for the state. The state is providing this wealth to the country, and it is not getting even half the amount of the about 5,700 crore annual revenue that is coming about. The state doesn't get even half. After the GST regime has come into place, what the state governments would get as VAT, 5% VAT, today we have the same 5% GST. 2.5% of that VAT is now taken away from the state through the GST regime, because it is contributed to the central GST amount. So those are the realities that we see in these areas, which we talk about as tribal dominant areas. We talk about so many percentage tribals living there. And it is not only the tribals who are living below the poverty line. It is the entire population. Chhattisgarh has a tribal population of, let us say, 32-33%. So it is not enough to talk about just tribals. Every individual who lives in that district, every individual who lives in the state, his right or his aspirations to a better standard of living must be protected through policy interventions. And when policy decisions like the transition that we have committed ourselves to are taken at the highest level in the country, then at the highest level in the country, we must ensure that those opportunities for life sustenance, livelihood sustenance, incomes, salaries, etc., for these regions who will be impacted most by our planned transition are guaranteed, are ensured. Don't leave it to the state governments. They'll never be able to do it. They just do not have the resources to do it. So it will be, handing the buck. Okay, ye aapko karna hai, aapka raj hai, aap karo, aap dekho, you get these people, you get this, you get that. It will never happen. We'll talk 20 years down the line and we'll say, oh, these areas have slipped way back, lower down the developmental ladder. And we should have done this, we should have done this. So when you are having the foresight today to release your report in the presence of this most eminent panel, let us become the voice, let us become the thoughts of the people of that region to ensure that those who are taking the decisions must first come forward to ensure. Don't leave it to the states, because I can tell you, the state government will not be, it is not capable of providing these alternatives. It just does not have the resources. So when we are taking this step, and if Koba is the case study for all such areas which will be affected by this transition, if we are to ensure justice in Koba, and through justice ensured for Koba, let us ensure justice for all the people living in all those regions who will be affected by this transition. What is the situation today? I was just checking with our officials in the electricity department, senior officials. Chhattisgarh has a captive power generation capacity of 20,000, roughly 20,000 megawatts today, of which do your report indicates about 6,000 odd megawatts in Koba. I am told the installed capacity there is 9,000 megawatts. The state electricity board has a capacity of 2,840 megawatts. This is the installed capacity, of which Koba alone has an installed capacity of 1,840 megawatts. This is the CGSPDL. What Chhattisgarh has today in terms of renewable capacity is 290 megawatts of solar, 280 of biomass, 120 of hydel. And the contracted capacities visualized by the state government is to place solar energy contribution to our peak capacity, which is today to 4,950 megawatts, is to place solar capacities at 8.5% of our need and 8% non-solar renewable energy, non-fossil fuel energy sources. So this is what the government is planning. And in between, we have seen that in spite of the COVID period, there has been an increase of 450 megawatts demand in the state itself. So this is the scenario to which Amitabh ji also referred. He mentioned about the national capacities, the growth in the requirement demand for energy that we'll be seeing, and transition in between. With that, ensuring not only job losses to be replaced, but to ensure more opportunities for people living in these regions. The powers that be, the decision makers that be at the highest level, must come out with some alternative. We are talking about 20 years down the line. So are we going to announce a major manufacturing unit for Koba, which will absorb and which will provide through it and through its ancillary units job opportunities for the residents of that district? If we do that, what you are envisioning through the release of this excellent report, extremely well thought out and presented report, is to ensure that justice is met. We are talking about it internationally, but will we do it for Koba? Will the government of India announce that these units, is it going to be a railway coach manufacturing unit, or whether it is going to be some defense manufacturing unit? You have aluminium there, you have steel nearby, you have water, you have other natural resources. What can be placed there to provide job opportunities to about 80,000 people? We must start on that today, before 20 years down the line, when these mining activities and the power plants would have closed. They would have gone through their life cycle, etc. Already in Korba, the state government units to the tune of, it's not much, but 440 megawatt capacity power plants have already been closed. They've gone through their life cycle. 4 more of our plants there, 210 megawatt capacity each, are being challenged by the new norms that have been put up by the central authorities, that the water to cool these chambers must, now those water plants must be installed in the units itself. Today, water is being cycled through canals, and then water goes to the plants and it goes, it runs off. So this will lead, for one, I am told that there is just no space to install these new units, these water circulation units in the plants that are there. I was just talking to the officer that we close one plant and put up a water circulation unit there, so the other 3 plants can use. So when we talk of justice, the injustice that these areas would be faced with, the injustice that would come about to the people of this area, so-called Amir Dharti ke so-called Garib Log, we must ensure today that they have these alternatives. Leave it to the state government, it will never happen. I am saying this without hesitation. I am speaking, I think, before a very, very erudite panel, and without hesitation, without again, any parochial balance or imbalance or bias or anything. I'm not speaking just for one region. It is there, it is close to us, it is close to our heart, it affects us more directly. That's okay. But unless we have these interventions today, we are not going to be able to reach our goal. We'll achieve transition. That is a given, it will happen. But will we achieve justice? A just transition for the people of these regions. That is the challenge which you have focused on. So I would congratulate you again, Chandrabhushan ji and your team. Excellent work, timely, far-sighted, with data, options. Will we be able to take them in time? I am very happy that you have put up this challenge in front of the intellectuals of the country, those who are policy decision makers and influencers, and through your and the efforts of your team, I do hope we will achieve just transition. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you all, and do keep advising us all the time till we are there to be able to contribute from our side. There's a small thing that the government of Chhattisgarh had in 2019 announced. You mentioned it in your report also, that we will not be putting up new power plants. So justice, injustice, what will it be for the state? What will it mean for the resources of the state? What will it mean for the dependency of the state? Lot of these factors are there, but leave those aside. We are moving ahead. We will move ahead. Together we'll move ahead for transition. It will be just, we must ensure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, T.S. Singhdevji. We would have liked to see you as well. But today is that day when the technology is not helping us. But nevertheless, we had three excellent talk on the issue of just transition. What has come out quite clearly from all three guests is that India is moving ahead. I think the confidence that has come from both Amitabh Kanji, Anil Jainji, and Singhdevji is that we are moving ahead, and we have to ensure that we are planning for it, that the justice element is embedded in our plan. I think Amitabh Kanji has talked about the leadership that Niti Aayog is willing to provide, the importance of union government as well as the state government to work together to strengthen capacity. The role of coal and public sector unit is going to be extremely important, as Anil Jainji said. So thank you very much. And I'm really delighted that we got to hear your thoughts today at the release of this report. And we will keep working on just transition. We have set up India Just Transition Center to do exactly that. We will work with Niti Aayog, Ministry of Coal, and the government of Chhattisgarh going ahead. So thank you very much. And this ends the inaugural session. Thank you, Anilji. Thank you, Amitabhji. Thank you, Singhdevji. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhushanji. Thank you so much.
May I now request Mandvi, my colleague, to take over as moderator for the second session. Mandvi, please.
Thank you, CB. Good afternoon to all the speakers and the listeners, and thank you again for joining in. I'm Mandvi Singh, and I work as a researcher in the Energy and Climate Change program of iForest. And I have the pleasure of moderating the second session on just transition planning, specifically in context of our findings from the ground. In this session, we dig a little deeper into what we have found in Koba, what it implies and how it all can be addressed in a just and equitable manner. And particularly as we look towards the future of imminent energy transition. We will begin with a quick presentation from my colleague Shrestha on just transition planning in Koba, and what our findings there are. This will be followed by a panel discussion on some of these ideas that have come up. We are joined by an absolute stellar and diverse group of stakeholders from Koba and Chhattisgarh. They will bring the perspective at the planning level of the state government, the coal industry, the RE sector, and also labor and community. I will introduce each of the panelists as I invite them to present their views. But to begin with, just sort of set the background for the discussion, I would request Shrestha to take us through the presentation on the Koba study. Over to you, Shrestha.
Thank you, Manvi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, this afternoon. We will keep the discussions in this session maybe bilingual, but my presentation will be in English for the convenience of the diversity of audience that we have today. Basically, I'll speak about how just transition can be planned in the context of Koba district. Some of the points have been discussed earlier in the session, so I'll briefly touch upon some of the points.
Shrestha, you would want to go in a presentation mode. Oh, yeah.
So just to give a briefing of the district profile as a recap, the district has about Koba 1.3 million population. Urban proportion is about 40%, rural is 60%. What is unique about this district, it is a Schedule 5 area with about 41% scheduled tribe population. Another important thing about Koba is that despite it being India's largest coal producer, about 66% of the geographical area is under forests, which is very, very unique with respect to any coal district. The second comes in the district is agricultural land, which is about 20%, which is largely rain-fed agriculture is practiced here. But the land holdings are very small in this district. About 65% are marginal, which is below 1 hectare. And overall, there is about 27,000 hectares of land that is available with coal mines and power plants. This includes 4 of the mines that are in pipeline and will start shortly in 1 to 2 years. If we look at the coal context of Koba, it is the top coal producer currently contributing to about 16% of India's coal production and quite a significant amount of installed power capacity of about 6.5 gigawatt. But not just for Koba, the coal is important for other districts of Chhattisgarh as well. And as this map shows, it is feeding into iron and steel plants, cement plants, chemical factories of other parts of Chhattisgarh. The district GDP, in fact, is highly reliant on coal. About 50% is coming from coal mining. But in this all win-win scenario, there are externalities and particularly environmental externalities, as Koba also remains a severely polluted area as identified by the Central Pollution Control Board. In fact, earlier Koba was a critically polluted area. It has slightly improved in terms of its environmental performance. Now, this is the geography of Koba with respect to its coal mines and power plants. And if we see the maps, it is largely concentrated in 2 blocks, Katgora and Koba. Katgora is a rural district and Koba also has a lot of rural part, but there is a high urban concentration around the municipality. So this is where most of the industrial activities are concentrated in this district. So considering the demographic distribution of the district as well as the distribution of the thermal power plants and the coal mines, we constituted a survey. How do we design it? We took 600 households as a survey, and which is a representative sample, spreading it out across the district dependent on the demographic concentration, the caste distribution, as well as the urban to rural population. And it's a representative sample in that sense. We also had 21 focus group discussions at various points of times over a 3-month period, numerous interviews with key functionaries, as well as it was an extensive review of government and industry data. This is a map of the variety of stakeholders we have interviewed, talked to, hold FGDs with. It involves government, it involves public representatives, such as PRIs and ward members. It involves industry, both coal mining and coal-based power, industry associations like small and medium industries, road transport, labor unions of both INTUC and BMS, workers of all coal mining and coal dependent industries, and this involves both formal and informal workers. We consulted the local communities, particularly the forest dependent people and the agricultural communities, and in fact, women's self-help groups, and finally, civil society members who are particularly working in these districts and active there. The key issue, what our research shows from Just Transition, and I have summarized, the report is exhaustive and extensive. It will be uploaded today. That there is a high proportion of non-workers in the district, despite it being a top coal producer. About 54% of the people within a working age group are non-workers. And what is also important, as we are looking ahead in time right now, there is a clear gender disparity in the workforce. Among the non-workers, there are 73% of women, and in the workers, it is only 22%. So definitely the women workforce participation has to improve going ahead as we plan a just transition. The second thing is that agriculture is the largest contributor in terms of absolute employment in the district. There is a lot of people involved in miscellaneous labor work and small businesses. And then comes the coal industry and government jobs and others. And also there is a clear spatial concentration because most of these opportunities are concentrated within a 10-kilometer radius, the mine clusters and the power plants. And as you move ahead from that, it is largely agriculture and forests. We discussed this. Over 87,000 workers are directly dependent on coal mining and coal dependent industries. And the kind of industries we captured in the report are coal-based power plants, road transport, coal washery, fly ash brick, or all the major ones in the district. The formal and informal workforce distribution, in fact, in coal mining and thermal power plants actually came out to be very equal. It's not as distinct as what we had found earlier in our study in Jharkhand, but the informality largely exists in the road transport sector. And I would say this is one of the telling findings of the Koba study, where in fact the employment in the road transport sector is nearly equal to the formal employment in coal mining. So we really need to take this sector seriously as we plan a just transition. We have mapped the informal workers because this is a sector which is very poorly understood in terms of their skill levels, their education levels, and will require targeted intervention. What it comes out is most of the informal workforce is poorly skilled, except for people who are doing some mechanical work in the thermal power plants or the drivers. At the same time, their earnings are fairly low, particularly in coal mining, where about 40 to 45% people are earning below rupees 10,000 per month. Similarly, for thermal power plants, it is a little better, but not too much difference. So this is something we really need to consider going ahead. Overall, the district has the reliance on public sector services or social services is largely dependent on the government. This is also because people also have very poor income. They're reliant on government schemes. They're reliant on government support. And we have analyzed various key development sectors such as healthcare, education, basic amenities such as drinking water, access to cooking fuel. Everywhere the government reliance is very high. Only for cooking fuel, because it's a highly forested district, there is a high reliance on firewood beyond the mining clusters and power clusters. But other than that, this is a district which is highly reliant on government support. We already discussed this, that about 32% of the district's population is multidimensionally poor and requires targeted intervention in all these areas. So basically, to summarize, what we found was that Koba fares poorly with respect to most of economic and development indicators, and thus remains highly vulnerable to any unplanned transition. Considering the thing in totality, there will be a need for broad-based socioeconomic transition planning through economic diversification and development intervention. And finally, what we have been discussing since morning, yes, the transition should be planned in a way not just being focused on coal industries, coal workers, who are somewhat in some ways benefiting from it at varied levels, but also those people who remain impoverished, such as the tribal community, such as the agricultural laborers. So it has to be a plan in totality. Then the report details out what can be a just transition planning approach and what are some of the key intervention areas. And we have developed a transition planning matrix highlighting 8 key components and various subcomponents around it. The first is that there is a requirement of developing an inclusive planning mechanism for just transition planning and execution. The second thing is determining a clear timeline. Skilling and reskilling of the workforce will be necessary, planning economic diversification, repurposing of land and infrastructure, which is essentially feed into the economic diversification. There will be requirement for investments in social and environmental issues, revenue substitution planning, which will go hand in hand with economic diversification, in fact, and finally, we need to secure the resources, the finances for just transition. The report analyzes 2 policy scenarios to contextualize the time frame of Koba. And we have taken, one is called the current policy scenario, which is essentially based on existing government policies and outlook. It takes into assumption that India will meet its net zero target by the year 2070, and coal-based power plants can be phased out by 2050, and non-coking coal production will cease by 2040. So we are not going into the coking coal production, which is tied to our steel industries. We also have taken into account that planned expansion of the existing mines can go on till the year of 2025, but if we have to meet the targets, coal has to peak by 2030. The other scenario is the net zero scenario, which is a more ambitious scenario and which is asking for a stiffer but achievable pathway for this transition. Here we are looking at India becomes ambitious about reaching a net zero by 2050. In that scenario, both coal-based power and non-coking coal production will be phased out by 2040, which is about 20 years from now. Now, if we take the current policy scenario, what essentially comes is closure of coal mines in Koba can happen by the year 2050 in a phased manner. And for power plants, it can happen by 2040. And accordingly, we need decadal development planning. If we take the net zero scenario, both of these closures can happen by 2040. And we'll show how this can happen. We have documented the economic disruptions as well as the economic opportunities around it. So under the current policy scenario, what happens is in 3 phases, coal can be phased out. We do not touch on the biggest mine in the first 10 years, but just work around the low profitable underground mines, which is essentially producing less than 2 million tons of coal currently. Over a 30-year period, the total coal production foregone will be just 4.6 million tons. And the revenue foregone will be about 27.5 billion Indian rupees, which is about 0.4 billion US dollars. This is very much achievable and with least economic disruption. Of course, under net zero scenario, the revenue foregone and the coal production foregone will be much higher, but we are currently planning as per the CPS. For power plant closures, as we said that they are aging, there will be not too much disruption, and all the power plants in Koba can be closed down in the next 20 years, considering their age, considering what the Central Electricity Authority has outlined, and our own analysis. Now, this is the essential component of just transition, and again, we have discussed this. One of the biggest opportunities of Koba is it has an aging formal workforce, both in the coal mining and the power sector. And this is a story we think, at least for the coal mining sector, it can be applicable to many parts of the country as well if we look into the workforce distribution of workers, because anyway, workers in coal mining has been going down due to mechanization. So this is a trend we might be finding in other parts of the country as well. What will be necessary is skilling and re-employment of about 30% of the workforce associated with coal mining and 27% for NTPC and CSBGCL workers. So this is the thing which we have to focus on. The informal workers will definitely need government support, and also infrastructure investment can provide employment opportunities for them. In fact, infrastructure investment has co-benefits also of attracting businesses in these districts and in many other parts of the country. The economic education planning should have a clear goal. As we have seen, 50% of Koba's GDP is tied to coal mining. Therefore, we need a balanced GDP growing ahead, where equal emphasis should be laid on primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. The key opportunities looking at the local resources lies with agriculture, forestry, and fishery sector as primary sectors of the economy. But we need to provide also for low carbon industrial development. And there are many industries that can come up with the necessary government policy support and impetus. But looking just as a kickstart, we can build on the non-timber forest product processing, agro-processing, and definitely the renewable energy. I will leave many of these to the discussions in the panel because we have experts in all of these in our panel today. We feel that investments in education and skill development will be extremely important for strengthening the service sector, and so as investments in healthcare and education sector will also provide scope benefit of achieving some of the development goals in the district. Land reclamation and repurposing cannot be emphasized enough. We have discussed this. It has both environmental and economic benefits. In fact, coal mining areas are also polluted. So we need a scientific and ecological land restoration effort to minimize the environmental harms, but as well as to reap the economic benefits. And I'll not touch on this because Chandrabhushan has already elaborated on this point. Finally, we need responsible environmental and social investments to build resilience. And this will also involve reform of policies and laws in their current form. We need environmental remediation on pollution mitigation measures in these areas. First and foremost is scientific closure of mines. In fact, the Ministry of Mines is in the process of formulating a robust mine closure framework. We need reclamation and redevelopment of industrial land through proper remediation. And finally, there will be disposal of assets, which requires the intervention and implementation of our waste management laws and policies. We will need interventions in social infrastructure and building human capital, aligning with the development targets of SDGs, and there are also national benchmarks. So we should target achieving at least those in the coming years through investments in education, through investments in healthcare, and particularly improving access to basic amenities. In fact, we need investment in distributed RE. The ministry has in fact come up with a framework now how distributed RE can enhance local livelihood opportunities. And this is something definitely will be important for a district like Koba. This is the finance mapping that we have done in the report, where we have taken into account that the revenue loss that will happen, but also the substitution can happen and what are the opportunities in hand. Overall, what we can say is that under the current policy scenario, we can have about 1.5 trillion rupees over the next 3 decades for investing in just transition in Koba. And we have analyzed decade by decade the amount of money that will be available. A key opportunity to kickstart the process lies with District Mineral Foundation funds, which Koba receives about 5.5 billion per year, amounting to about $73 million US. Going ahead, we have discussed through necessary policy reforms, if the coal cess is made available, it will be the biggest green fund for supporting just transition. But said and done, that will definitely not be enough because it's a huge process and we will need private financing as well as international support to accelerate the process. So this is going to take a cooperation and work together of the state government, the central government, as well as the international community. Another key opportunity that is in hand is through convergence of government schemes and programs that are there in Chhattisgarh and some of which are currently ongoing in Koba. And we have highlighted a number of schemes in the report. And we feel that there are many small amount, large amount of money under various of the schemes, and they all align with development goals of the state and the country. So if we can put together the pool of resources, align their goals, it can provide the impetus for Koba to move on faster. Finally, and I'll end with this, The coal and power industry, though we are talking of a coal and coal-based power phase out, but we think that their restructuring and reinvestment in different businesses will be a very, very important aspect of the just transition. Because our coal sector is hugely public sector undertaking, we have companies like NTPC who are going through diversification now. So these companies can play a key role in the economic restructuring that is necessary for Koba and many other coal districts of India. These are some of the figures actually that are up there. CIL already has established 2 wholly owned subsidiaries for solar PV, for manufacturing RE. NTPC has also established its wholly owned RE subsidiaries. In fact, the CEO is joining us today in the next session to talk more about it. And the good news is that the government is supporting these ventures. The Ministry of Coal has asked the coal companies to develop their decarbonization plans. Then definitely there is government impetus. And overall, what this all can help together is to achieve a just transition in Koba with the support of the government, with the support of the industries, and certainly with the support of the local community and all the other stakeholders. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Reshta, for summarizing the study findings for us. There are a number of things that you've highlighted that we will sort of take up while we discuss these issues with our experts. Most importantly, there are diverse set of elements of the JT planning matrix. And these are cross-cutting issues of economic diversification, land, labor, funding, etc., that somehow have to be simultaneously addressed for the just and equitable transition to pan out. The expert panel that we have today, as I had mentioned previously, represents some of the most crucial elements that will come into play as we talk about operationalizing JT planning. And I will invite each one of you to present your views and reactions and perspectives on everything that has been discussed so far. Just that I will request all the panelists to sort of stick to the timeline for your opening remarks of 5 to 7 minutes, so that we can have at least 2 rounds of Q&A after that. So we begin with Mr. K. Subramanian, who is member State Planning Commission with the government of Chhattisgarh. And we are quite grateful, sir, that you've joined in despite your bad health. So over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Okay, good afternoon to you all. Thank you, Mandvi Singh ji. And for a nice presentation, though I could not get a copy of the report. So whatever the presentation was made, Shrestha ji has made a nice presentation, and it is full of information. And the transition, planning matrix and projections and convergence of different government schemes, I think it will take some time for me to absorb the entire thing. So what I suggest is that if I get a copy of it, I'll try to respond to that, because certain figures in which I find that like the labor force participation rate, which you have mentioned, I think there are some anomaly in that, because the latest figures it's not matching with that, but doesn't matter. But the whole issue is that what we find that the key players for this transition would be central government, state government, then the private sector, this civil society, as well as the labor union of that area, and local community. They will be the key players. And since we are already working on the sustainable development goal, and on that we have, as you all know, that there are 17 goals on which the State Planning Commission is the nodal agency for the state government to work on it. So naturally, this area would be of interest for us, and this study would give us really some insight about the areas like Koba and how to work in that area. Because you know that this coal which Koba is getting, all the thermal power stations they are getting from Gevra mines, Kusmunda mines, Deepika mines. The water which they are getting, it is coming from Hasdev River. Then so natural resources are being used, and how to maintain that natural resource. That the natural resource management itself is a problem in that area, because it is related to the environment. It is posing environmental hazards in that area. But since we are migrating, we are intending to migrate from coal to non-coal, that is to the renewable energy side. So the different areas in which we need to focus. First of all, since the agriculture is the main, economic activity in that Koba area, so we would like to focus on the agriculture, because major, as your presentation has also cited, that mainly people, they are dependent on agriculture. So agri-based food processing is an area in which we really would like to work. And especially we are giving more emphasis on millet production. So millet, we have started a millet mission in the state, and hopefully the area will be covered sooner under this millet mission. So millet is one such area where we would like to, focus on. Then agriculture, so many agriculture produce which are coming. And as you all are aware that horticulture, in the area of horticulture, Chhattisgarh has made a good stride. And now there are 2 districts, Durg and Jashpur. They are really, they have come up in the horticulture map of India. Now probably the Koba, since it is also having the same potential, because all the paddy plain area is having a good alluvial soil. So these areas can also be tackled, can be taken up for raising horticulture crops. Horticulture and horticulture related food processing part, we can take it up in those areas. Then since if the area which I could find is that about, see, the land use there, the water bodies are there. So water bodies can be used for fisheries. So pisciculture is one such area where really, lot of efforts can be made. And in the area of fisheries, Chhattisgarh has really made a name for itself. We were net importer a few years back, and now we are net exporter. The fish production is so high here. From here, the fishes are going to the Bengal, Orissa, and other places. So that situation has totally changed. Animal husbandry is also one such area where people, they are already having some skill, but we need to, upgrade their skill so that they can take it up. The area where the capacity building is required, in fact, we have some 7 engineering and polytechnic colleges are there, and the industry academia interface is very minimal there. So we need, the upcoming industries which are likely to come up in that area. For that, the course curriculum design and other things are to be made in such a way that these boys who will come out of such colleges, they should get an employment. And especially if it is focused on renewable energy, the curriculum is designed in such a way so that they can get the employability is ensured in those areas. Then there is a possibility of, IT and IT enabled services to come up in that area. Because as I have said, that there are engineering colleges there, science colleges are there, so educated youth is there, and they can be suitably engaged by giving them some kind of a training, skill upgradation. If they are, some people, they are already skilled, so their upskilling can be done, reskilling can be done, and they can be suitably employed. So unemployment and underemployment, disguised unemployment, these are the problems which are there. So as in the presentation also you have said that there is a unemployment. I see that since most of the farmers, 85% farmers, they are either small farmers or marginal farmers. So their landholding is very small. Overall in the state, there are about 76% farmers, they are small and marginal farmers. And they have only one crop. That is, they take only the Kharif crop. And since irrigation potential has not increased much in the state, so naturally they depend on monsoon rains for raising crops. So very few, farmers, they have the marketable surplus which they are producing. And for them only the support price is having some meaning. Because if the farmers, they are living on subsistence level, probably this support price may not have much of a meaning for them. So that is an area, because post-Kharif fallow land is much there. So how to make use of those land, that is also to be seen. I had seen some example of Karnataka, where the farmers cooperatives, they have come up and they have, they entered into an agreement with some solar power producers, and solar parks have come up in such areas. So if that scheme is working well there, probably we may think of, because a lot of fallow land is there, lot of land which is underproductive. So we can think of, leasing the fallow land to set up solar park in such areas. For that, some kind of a legal agreement or a long-time lease agreement can be done. Some annuity arrangements can be made. So this is one such area which I feel that things can be taken up. So economic feasibility, social responsibility, and environmental integrity. On these three parameters only, we would like to, take up any work in this area, in this Koba area. And our government is committed for that. So at this point, let me stop here. Let us hear from others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for identifying those areas of economic diversification based on the situation on ground in Koba. I would, at this point, like to invite Mr. S.K. Pal, who's Director Projects and Planning at SCCL, because I think it's important to get the coal company's perspective before we get into perhaps RE and other areas.
Yes,
So,
yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very much.
Good afternoon to the dignitaries present over here. First of all, I thanks Mr. Chandrabhushan and his team for this nice work done for Koba, where we are operating in a large scale for coal mining business. And I happens to be there for the last 10 years, so that I have a little bit in depth of the issues. And to my mind, just transition is a framework of planned activities to develop a range of social interventions need to secure people's right and livelihood when economy is shifting. The previous speakers have already spelled out about the details of the just transition of Koba, which is the largest district of the country, rather producing coal such a high scale. And I'll request to switch over to a small PPT which I have prepared to depict before the audience. Please upload. Yes. Nice. Is it visible to the panel?
No.
Just a minute. Just a minute. Just a minute. Yes. Since slide number 2.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Next one, number 2. This is just about whatever has already been told, that Koba is producing nearly 17 to 18% of the coal produced by the country, and it is the power generation capacity is more than 7,500 megawatt of this particular district. And next, and other data, I think it has been already given to the field. These are about these general issues. This has already been deliberated. Next. Coming down directly to the subject, these mega project activities are producing coal since long, and we have ambitious plan of producing coal from that coal field. We have a 70 million ton project capacity, Kusmunda 50 million ton, and Dipka 40. All these three contributes the major kitty to the coal production of the company as well as the country. Next. This is the ambitious plan of producing 1 billion ton of coal for the country for next 3 to 4 years. The production from this Koba district is going to increase from 135 to 186 million ton by 2024 and 25. Next. Actual, I just want to correct the figures because the mineable reserve in the existing project is at present 2972. This is in million tons. And in the deep side of this project, there is another, there is a reserve of 2,800 million ton, and the total reserve of this coal field with thick seam contributes to 5,772 million tons. So at the rate of producing 150 million ton per year, this coal field can last up to 30 years. This can sustain the production up to 38 years. But looking into the challenges of environmental scenario of this country as well as the nation and our commitment, there may be early closure of the projects. This is actually in national perspective the demand forecast scenario of this country, and as you see that with a growth rate of GDP plus 4%, the coal demand in the coming scenario will be there it will just increase and stabilize by 2030. And 2050, the country will be needing 1315 million ton of coal, as per these different forecasts of different agency. And next one. These are the goals of our company. Actually, you can see the free market of coal, 100% substitutability of import of thermal coal, net zero coal sector. This is we are planning to achieve it by 2040, and strengthening of this PSO strategy, and handing over the mine closure on principle of just transition. This is also a agenda in our development plan. Technological adoption and mechanization of the present loading and transport and evacuation of coal. This is a tentative production of this Koba field, the tentative production planning. However, I have already told that it is subject to change depending on these policies and environmental goals of the nation. As you see that by 2030, the production will peak to 170 million ton approximately, and then after 40-45, it will drop down, and by 55, this production has to drastically come down as per the reserve potential of the field and the requirement projected for these countries. The huge land resources, we are already having 20,000 hectares of land in our different operational areas, and future land requirement will be 6,000 hectares to mine these other properties who are annexed to these mega projects. And the total land bank will be sitting on will be 28,000 hectares of land. Next. Out of this land, tenancy land will be 19,000 hectares, and government land 4,600 hectares, forest 3,869 hectares. This contributes the total contribution of land for mining. Going to the repurposing of this land, actually the pre-mining scenario, this total 20,000 hectare, 28,000 hectare contributes 19,000 of agricultural land and government land and forest land of 3,867 hectares. After post mining activities, actually we will have a huge land of reclaimed area of 15,000 hectares, water body of 7,000 hectares in all the different 3 mines, and mining infrastructure. That infrastructure includes the huge residential area, buildings, hospitals, schools, and this also includes rail networking, because we are already in job for planning to special purpose vehicle for a huge networking of rail, and we are investing nearly 10,000 crores on this, and to have a connectivity from Dharamjaygarh, Raigad, and passing through Pendra. And after this redundancy of these coal projects, this will actually act as a pipeline of transport to relocate industries around this belt, because this will be connected to the main trunk line of Katni-Bilaspur line. So, for repurposing of land is concerned, this first para of 15,000 hectares of land, which will be available in the mine reclaimed area and down backfilled area, it can cater to anything. We can plan for agriculture, we can plan for horticulture, we can plan for the huge amount of solar parks or sort of things. And this water body actually gives a very good opportunity for ecotourism, water sports, fishery. We have already trial a fishery at a Surajpur district, the old abandoned quarry. It has been given to the state government with the help of the state government. We are already doing fishery arrangement there, and it is giving employment to the peoples over there. And then mining infrastructure which are not been disturbed, our residential colonies, schools, hospitals, buildings, this amounts to nearly 6,000 hectares of land. This land can be repurposed for many purposes, for educational hub, within industries and technical institutes for giving skill development and other things. So this will help definitely a long way. This land can be repurposed with the help of the central government as well as the state government.
So if you can a little bit conclude also, because we'll
yes. Just this slide already we have gone through it, because the huge economical country in the coal mining is giving 50% of the current economy. It has to be repurposed, and this share has to be given to other sectors of the economy. This is known to everybody. Next. Next. Yes, we are diversifying in these ways. We are going aggressively for solar power, and we are going for this first molecule. And these are our ventures in diversification, so that
working on that.
Next. This is the in near future, in coming 3-4 years, we are going for such a huge amount of Next. And SCCL as itself is planning for 5,000 megawatt by 24-25. This solar power. Next. This is another diversification area. We are going for a surface coal gasification plant, but this is not in the Koba district. This will bring nearly 7,000 crores of investment for conversion of coal to ammonia in a eco-friendly manner. This coal-bed methane is also not there in Chhattisgarh area, but SCCL is planning for that in Suakpur, Madhya Pradesh area. Next. OB2 sand in Koba area, actually there is a huge shortage of sand, and this is causing erosion for riverbeds. And we are planning to convert our waste material to sand at Koba itself. And this is the joint venture where with state government as well as IRCAN and railways for rail infrastructure development. After closure of these mines, and this track will definitely suffice the transport network, so that heavy industries can be set up by the side of Koba, and it is also open to public transport. These are my FMC activities for which this carbon reduction will be there. Next. Greening, we are already in this activities. We are trying to develop the forest cover in and around the coalfield. Next. 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 This is the fishery at Bisrampur area, which we are doing pisciculture in the backwater of the old mine out areas. This is a floating hotel there itself to sustain ecotourism and the employment generation potential of that area. This is our roadmap actually for carbon neutrality by 2000. It's not visual. Yes. By 2040, we'll be producing 260 million ton of coal, which will indirectly emit 8.95 million ton of CO2. And we have a roadmap for reduction of our, for mitigating that, and that will be done through this solar power generation, carbon sink by plantation, our FMC project, energy conservation, and clean coal technology. By that, we'll mitigate the carbon generated by the coal mining operations. I think, Mr. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that comprehensive view of the diversification plans that SCCL has. I would at this point invite Shri Alok Katiyarji from CREDA, the Chhattisgarh Renewable Energy Development Agency, to share his opening remarks and perhaps a perspective on the role that RE can play in Chhattisgarh and Koba.
Good afternoon to all ma'am and sir. Straight to the point. What I gather from your presentation, that there will be two imminent danger by the closing of mines and the power plants. One is the blockage of cheap supply of the cheap source of energy. Second is the unemployment. So here I would like to address these two issues. One is the alternative source of the energy. If we see the occupation pattern of the Koba district, so agriculture is the prime activity. So we will have to focus on that. In agriculture, we have to increase the production of agriculture and horticulture sector. For this, we have to create irrigation facilities. So for irrigation facilities as a renewable base, so we propose that all the pump of that area should be solar-based this irrigation power pumps. And Chhattisgarh is the leader in the establishment of the solar irrigation. We have established so far 1 lakh pump in the entire state. So we can within 3 years we can replace all the pump energized by either diesel or electricity by the solar system. So this is the one area where the CREDA or RE can be applicable. So we can enhance the production of the agriculture sector, this horticulture sector also. Second is if we produce more and more, what will be the future of that product? Because horticulture produce has a very little or very less shelf life. So we have to create cold chain. We have to create cold chambers, small cold storages. So they should be RE based. And in our state, we are making small cold storages, 5 metric tons, 10 metric tons of the capacity. So they can be established in the Koba area. So if we enhance the production of this horticulture produce and the minor forest produce, even the fisheries, they require the establishment of the cold chain and perfect cold chain, because there are more than 40% post-harvest losses in the horticulture, around 20% post-harvest losses in the forest produce sector, and the same in the fishery sector. So reduce this post-harvest losses, we have to create the cold chain, which is the RE based. Third is the cooking. In your presentation, you have shown that the primary source of the energy is the forest wood. So instead of that wood, we propose that solar induction plates for the cooking purpose in the villages and the people who are living in and around the forest areas. And solar induction cooking plates are very successful. Now they are coming in, and this can also further reduce the dependency on the energy. Third is by closure of these mines and the power plants, there will be a lot of free land which will be available to us. So we can establish large mega size solar parks and other solar based activities which can be established there. But it requires huge investment and technological innovative. So since Koba, I think the Koba is situated in a very geographically disadvantageous position. So investment at present, a huge investment in that sector is not possible. Even in any sector, it is not possible in the Koba area at present. Until and unless we make our policies very attractive, investment friendly, and investment cooperative. So I think we have to also work in that area to make policy in such a way that the investment can come up in the Koba area so that this land can be used properly. Because we have lands in other areas also, but incentives are not there, so they are not properly utilized. So our policy should be modified in that way for that mega scale solar parks. This is from my side.
Thank you so much, sir, for both highlighting the opportunities in distributed RE segment, particularly that can directly benefit the agri segment, which is already the source of livelihood for majority population, and also the very crucial aspect of the land that will be available, potentially available for large RE at a later stage. I now invite Ramesh Sharmaji, who is the country convener of Ekta Parshad, to give the civil society perspective on this, particularly to highlight the community aspect of things.
Yeah, thanks, Mandvi, and thanks iForest team and Just Transition team for this wonderful research. It's really eye-opening research. So I congratulate the whole team. But let me bring some issues which is actually concerned with the local community, especially if we talk about the just energy transitions. For me, the just energy transition is less technical, but more political issue today. The energy hunger means energy crisis and inequality in distribution disparity, largely dependent on the two dimensions. The first is the geographical. If I take the very specific example of Koba, the capital or the district headquarters, the Koba town actually enjoy 24/7 electricity. If you take the example of Katghora, which is a block headquarters, which actually enjoys the electricity on an average 20/7, that means less 4 hours. And if you take the example of village Kendai, which is roughly around 60 kilometers from the Koba town, they have only 14 hours of electricity per day. So here you can see a very clear disparity in terms of distribution, and which is one of the reasons of energy hunger. At the same time, if you see the whole sectoral dimension of the electricity and the availability of energy, of course, particularly in Koba, and even if you go beyond the Koba, we can see that most of the industries and the industrial houses, they enjoy the electricity almost like 24/7, or they have like 100% level. But if you take the example of villages where people are largely dependent for electricity for their agriculture as well as for the domestic purposes, the availability of electricity is nearly half as compared to the industry or the other big corporate houses. So here, the whole question of energy hunger and the crisis and the inequality has a very, very important aspect of the whole energy transition here. If I refer the draft National Energy Policy of 2017, which aims that all census villages are planned to be electrified by 2018. In Korba district, Gondahwa, I named the village Gondahwa, was among those a dozen of village where people first time saw the electricity only in 2020. So the target was set for the 80, but actually electricity reached only in 2020. So here we can see that whatever we are committed in the national draft energy policy, in terms of the actual reality, we are far beyond in terms of the community perspective. The proposed energy modeling, which is there in the draft energy policy of 2017's aim, a similar level of per capita energy consumption in rural as well as the urban area by 2031-32. So which actually talked about the energy consumption. But we know that there's no proper roadmap available, which at least ensure that the Kendai village will also get the same level of power supply as Korba is enjoying today. So here still we can see that there are some imbalances which is there very much. Let me talk about some of the issues. As I said, that the whole energy transition is a political subject. But let me talk about some core issues of livelihood, because if you see the whole demographic pattern of Korba, almost 2/3 of the population still live in the countryside, in the villages. So it's very, very important to discuss about the whole livelihood issues also. According to our own estimate, a significant 62% population in the Koba district are landless and homeless. That means they don't have a legal entitlement in their hand. Similarly, a significant majority of the tribal and other forest dwellers are directly dependent on the forest and the forest resources, but their due rights under the Forest Rights Act is not yet properly recognized. This means what? A majority of rural population, and especially the tribal community, is deprived out of their rights and entitlement. This results as 50% plus rural population in the Koba falls under the below poverty line and unable to find any source of livelihood for their survival. This caused a massive migration from the villages in search of wages and ad hoc income, which further pushed them in a misery. This ended with a vicious circle of chronic exploitation of tribal and other marginalized community. Unfortunately, this has happened in the Koba district, which contributes significantly in the GDP of Chhattisgarh, and alone contributed highest revenue in the state, mainly through coal mining and thermal power plant, and making Chhattisgarh as an energy surplus state. Any step for ensuring land and livelihood resources to the tribal and other marginalized community will certainly improve their life. The mixed forest of Koba able to cater the energy demand of tribal and other forest dwellers, but there is an urgency to ensure the rights over the community land and community forest resources as recognized under the FRA. So until as these due rights are not given to the community, it's very difficult to talk about any further level of justice. Unfortunately, only 38% villages have received half-hearted rights over their resources. A proper execution of FRA is still missing somewhere. Earlier, Koba used to be famous for the sericulture and silk units in the villages. Unfortunately, most of these villages, industries were also lost because of the massive acquisition of land as well as the forest resources. On the above, the state has failed to protect the rights and livelihood space for those community. By allotment of land and proper protection to the silk producers group, the state can regenerate a massive livelihood space for the dependent community in the Koba as well as in the adjoining areas. There is also ample scope for building a forest produce based village economy in the Koba district. Despite of significant contribution of forest produce, there is no single unit of forest produce processing is actually operational. If you see, especially the mega units, any effort for setting up a forest produce processing unit in Koba may ensure alternate source of livelihood for the tribal and for the other forest dwellers. So these are some important aspects if we see the whole community perspective. But let me talk about some of those policies issues which actually has a lot of meaning for the people. If you take the example of Chhattisgarh solar policy, which need to be executed properly with a clear emphasis on energy equity to the marginalized community across 20,000 plus villages in Chhattisgarh. I'm not just talking about the Koba, but I'm talking about the other villages, especially in the Chhattisgarh. There is an ample scope for biofuel, especially in the areas of degraded and the lost forest, where the Campa fund could be used for the green energy, and the whole Campa fund could be directed to the Forest Rights Committee if we really want to recognize the forest rights as a one important aspect in the life and livelihood for the tribal people. Considering the Chhattisgarh government's flagship program, Narwa Garwa Ghurwa Bari, there is a scope for gobar and agri-biomass-based energy production with the active involvement of the local community. Unfortunately, there is still a very small steps has been taken so far. Most importantly, there is an urgency to develop an energy model which emphasize on similar level of per capita energy consumption in the rural as well as the urban area, as promised in the National Energy Policy of 2017. Chhattisgarh government need to develop its own state energy policy with a clear focus on energy mix by increasing the share of non-fossil fuel based capacity, which aimed at above 40% by 2013, as indicated in the National Energy Policy, which this aspect is the whole aspect of energy mix is still missing. The Chhattisgarh government also need to explore the possibilities of alternate energy resources towards reaching to the energy self-sufficiency and equitable energy supply to the people. Let me talk about that how local community could.
Ramesh, if you can sort of summarize in a minute.
Yeah, I'll just take maximum of 1 minute only. So according to the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, nearly 65% of the geographical area in Koba district is recognized under the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution. This means a people's right, autonomy, privilege, and ownership over land, forest, and livelihood resources has secured within a given legal framework. This means without any consent, any process for acquisition of these resources is unconstitutional and resulted in poverty, violence, and corruption. This means almost 80% of the community who lived in the 5th schedule area of Koba deserve a legal safeguard as provided under the Constitution. This means the duty of a state is to protect the constitutional right with or without development plans proposed and executed for the benefit of the state as well as the people. So here I would like to say that until and unless these institutional and the constitutional provisions have been safeguarded, any state-led plan or process for the just energy transition will be welcomed by the people. But any plan or process which alienates the people from the safeguard given under the PESA or FRA will be resulted as injustice and turned into the structural violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rameshji, for covering a lot of ground from both the challenges perspective and the opportunities perspective. I will, we'll have a quick round of questions from my end, and then perhaps we'll take a few from the audience. I'll go to Mr. Subramaniam first. Sir, in the address that Singhdeo-ji made, he talked about the constraints that exist at the state level, that could become a critical bottleneck in this entire, just transition process. I wanted to understand, this from you, that, how can the State Planning Commission become a facilitator in just transition? And if there are capacity gaps, what kinds of capacity building support would you require to take this forward?
In fact, in your report, the convergence part which you have mentioned, convergence of different government-run schemes and programs. So if I get a copy of your report, I think that would be very handy for me to coordinate among different departments. So how their resources and their skill sets and their networking can be used for addressing these issues. So once I get the copy of your report, probably I would be working on it. I would start working on it.
Yeah. Subramanianji, just to mention, we had shipped it. Unfortunately, I think we were hoping you will receive it yesterday, but it should be there anytime.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Sorry.
So, sir, but generally, sir, how is the State Planning Commission looking at just transition?
In fact, for the first time, when I received a message from you, that time only I came to know about it, that there is this kind of a transition is in the offing. So we have to make up our mind, and your report would be quite useful for that, so that we can organize some brainstorming session at our end. We will call all the concerned departments at the State Planning Commission, and we would share your report with all of them, and we'll say what best can be done with a timeline. So I think your report would come quite handy for that.
Right, sir.
Right.
Sure, sir. Sure. So, SK Pal, sir, I have a question for you. You have talked about your company's diversification plan, and you have yourself sort of talked about, a phase out of coal, imminent phase out of coal, whether it is 40, 50, 60, we can talk about it, but it is in the offing. And the question that we sort of we have been discussing even at iForest is that how are coal companies likely to accommodate employees as this shift takes place, and do you think reskilling becomes a concern? Do you think the informal labor, which Mr. Kant also talked about, that becomes a concern for you?
Actually, to this question, I have only 12,000 people working in Koba. These are our employees.
Right.
And the age group of these people are like that. They are mostly in 40 plus range. So I think this will synchronize with their superannuation. The closure of coal, phase out of coal will be in sync with those issues. And the remnant people can be accommodated in our transition programs, because we are going in a large scale for solar plants. And I think by 3940, by end of 40, we will be having 5,250 megawatt of solar plants. To manage this, we can reskill these people and engage there itself. And through other, we are diversification for other projects also, for gasification of coal, for coal-bed methane, and coal to chemicals rather. So we can accommodate those peoples in other places for arena of work. So this is just a beginning. We can manage with our people, because we are now at present having 40,000 of people across ACCL, and in Koba field we are having only 12,000. I think all the people are the working age group of 40 to 60, and it will be in sync with the superannuation of those peoples.
So going forward, the green business is likely to expand, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Sure.
Malvi Singh ji, just I have a small request to make. In fact,
Yes.
I would like Mr. S.K. Pal to share his presentation with the State Planning Commission, because thank you, because that would be quite helpful for us.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So I would at this point like to ask a question to Mr. Alok Katiyar, sir. Sir, the progress that Chhattisgarh has made in DRE is quite commendable, and there is the leadership position in solar pumps that you've already talked about. But as far as large-scale solar is concerned, you hinted on the policy gaps perhaps, but what do you see as key challenges, and how can the state address them? And land, we saw the numbers that Mr. Pal shared, and land is quite available in quite abundance. But how do you think we can overcome those challenges to utilize that land for, say, a green economy development?
Yes, ma'am. As you know, ma'am, Chhattisgarh being a poor state and a tribal state, हम लोगों का जो प्राइमरी फोकस था वो जो छोटे छोटे हमारे फार्मर्स थे, मार्जिनल फार्मर्स थे, हमारे जो ट्राइबल्स थे, उनके ऊपर हम लोगों ने छोटे छोटे इंटरवेंशंस किए. फर्स्ट वाज द इरिगेशन सेक्टर, सेकंड वाज द ड्रिंकिंग वाटर सेक्टर, थर्ड वाज द हेल्थ एंड एजुकेशन सेक्टर. दीज आर द कोर एरियाज इन व्हिच वी वर्कड टू प्रोवाइड क्लीन and reliable source of the energy. All our primary health centers, most of the major health centers and district health centers, they have alternate source of the solar energy. Irrigation potential, we are harnessing all the existing pumps which are diesel operated through the diesel or the other source of energy, converting them to solar. And also creating new irrigation sources, solar based. तो इन छोटे छोटे इंटरवेंशन से न सिर्फ लोकल एम्प्लॉयमेंट मिला लोगों को, जिसमें कि ऑपरेशन एंड मेंटेनेंस एक बहुत बड़ा पिरामिड शेप, इन्वर्टेड पिरामिड शेप स्ट्रक्चर है, जिसमें कि बहुत लार्ज स्केल पे स्किल्ड एंड सेमी स्किल्ड एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन होता है. तो ये हमारी आरी एक्टिविटी से हुआ है, जो कि कोरबा में भी किया जा सकता है, क्योंकि कोरबा एक अर्बन एरिया है. ये जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट है वो सेमी अर्बन डिस्ट्रिक्ट कहलाती है, तो वहाँ इतना अधिक इंटरवेंशन नहीं है. लेकिन यहाँ ये इस तरह के इंटरवेंशन करके वी कैन क्रिएट लॉट ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज. इसके बाद हम लोगों ने पिछले 2 साल पहले अपनी सोलर पॉलिसी को वी हैव अमेंडेड सुटेबली, मेक इट अट्रैक्टिव, एंड with the amendment of the solar policy, we have got around 2,000 megawatt 2,000 megawatt power plant installation. They are in pipeline and under installation. By the end of 2024, we will be having additional 2,000 megawatt solar power generation. That will be total generation through the solar power will be around 3,500 megawatt. So this is the area where we are working in the urban areas, and the irrigation, drinking water, we around 5,000 villages. We are providing safe drinking water through the RE energy, through the solar energy. We are working in the 5,000 villages out of 19,500 villages. This is a substantial. And future, we are planning to make it half of the villages under the Jal Jeevan Mission Yojana. So these are the interventions which we are doing in the micro level and the mega level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alok sir. Rameshji, if I can come to you right now. Sorry, so you have this vast experience of working on ground, especially in forestry sector, and you talked about the rights movement, within FRA. So I wanted to ask you, how can the community be sort of mobilized and involved in the JT planning process? Based on your experience, knowing what has not worked, what do you think is practically possible, and we can draw perhaps maximize on the results that we get?
Yeah, thanks, Madhvi, for this very specific and very important question. The first thing which I felt is a very, very important is to rebuild the trust within the state players and the non-state players, and especially the PSUs and the private enterprises. So the whole trust building process is a major, it's a backbone. It's a backbone, because unless there's no conversation, there could be a lot of rumor, there could be a lot of kind of a disputes between the people and the department, as well as the people who want to cooperate and people who don't want to cooperate, etc. So the whole trust building process is one of the important part, and I think that Subramaniam Saab and Alok sir and Paul Saab is in the right position to initiate all these processes, because if this process start from that, and that would be really helpful for all of us. The second very important aspect for all of us is to educate the community also, because at present the people are not very happy with a lot of reason, and that's why in my opening remarks I said it very clearly. It's a less technical, but it's a more political subject. So how to resolve this political disputes within the people and the state, as well as between the people's resolution as well as the state policy, is also equally important. So here it is very, very important to take people on board. Unfortunately, there are there is not a lot of window is actually available at present. So the more window, it's more welcoming from the people's side. The third very important aspect, as I said, that the Koba is one district where more than 2/3 of the population lived in the rural areas. Okay, the Forest Rights Act and the PESA are two very important institutional framework which is available for the people. Unfortunately, if you see the execution of these two, one of the most progressive provisions in the Koba district, it's where we are poorly far behind. Right. So I think this could be one starting point, that if the state is take a forward step to regularize their claims over the land and the forest resources, possibly I could say that there are other sources of energy also beyond the coal and beyond the solar, and people can explore all those possibilities. So I think these are the important aspects to build this transition and build this bridge.
Right. I think this is quite an important point, because, as I go through the questions that have been raised by the audience also, this issue of what happens to the community and the affected families and workers, that question is coming in again and again. And I think that will be very, very crucial to address that, in a manner that is effective. I think I'll ask one question from the audience that has come for Mr. S.K. Pal. Sir, what is the plan for coal mining closure? That's from Mr. Ashok, and I think maybe you should, you can perhaps address this a little bit.
Actually, this is for me, I think.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Actually, at present, we have a scheme of things for closure of mines. But now, with the intervention of the World Bank, Coal India and Ministry of Coal has just started thinking for this just transition, rehabilitation of people who are dependent on those mines. Now we have started working on it. I think in a year or two, it will given a good shape, and we will be able to address these issues of the people for economic rehabilitation of the persons residing in and around this coalfield area.
Right. Shrishta, is there anything that you would want to add at this point?
No, I just wanted to ask Manvi, sorry, to
no problem.
Paul Sahab, that the current mine plan, as the things that we have evaluated, will require some changes if we are thinking about repurposing. The mine closure plan itself will require some rethinking. So is SCCL thinking about re-looking at mine closure plan from a repurposing objective? Paul Sahab?
Exactly at this present level of thinking is that after closure of a mine, only the mine closure plan is a little bit going for the safety aspect of the closure of the mines. It is not at all looking towards the repurposing of the land, as well as the people who are involved indirectly on those businesses. Suppose small vendors, vegetable markets, people around villages around a small marginal workers who are selling their vegetables in the market where people are there employed. So now this has begun a topic, and I think World Bank has begun two projects. One in Korea district of Chhattisgarh, because Koba closure is little away in the horizon. We have planned for Korea district of Chhattisgarh to have, because old underground mines are going to close there fast. And we will have their experience, and we will see how we can rehabilitate the people who are entirely dependent on those coal economy.
I was looking for that answer, because mine closure plan, so far has not looked at repurposing, and therefore one of the big work on just transition planning will be to relook at mine closure plans again from the perspective of repurposing. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Something that SCCL and CIL should be looking at.
We are having a trial project at Korea district for those underground mines of Visrampur, Baikunthpur, etc. We are going to be closed in the first phase in coming 10-12 years, and we are looking to that.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for their inputs and quite detailed remarks on from the perspective that they're speaking from. I think there's a lot for us to have for us to think and discuss and reflect upon going forward. There are questions that have been answered. Some questions are to be answered in the future. But I think at this point, I'll just hand it over to CD for the next session, which is our last and final session. I think CD, you're moderating. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Manvi, and must say that excellent discussion in session 2. I think Ramesh did raise the issue of trust and community participation in planning for just transition. I don't think that we have done this report. We did about 20 odd focus group discussion. But a just transition plan will require building confidence between different stakeholders, because otherwise misinformation, distrust, all these things will start playing out. And we have taken the first step in terms of engaging with the community. But when the real just transition plan for Koba will be developed, I think community engagement, local institutions, and engagement of local political institutions are going to become very, very important. As well as I think Mr. Paul's presentation was extremely good, because I'm happy that SCCL is thinking about both repurposing of mine. It is thinking about how to redevelop that area. This thinking has to go to other mining areas as well. because mine closure plan so far has been about safety of post-closure. It has not been about repurposing. But considering, as Anil Jain ji said, we are a land-scarce country. And if we want to redevelop Koba, we have to redevelop it on the closure land that is going to be available post-closure of mines and thermal power plant. So, and as all the interventions were excellent today. Now, we are in the last session, and I must say, I'm so happy to see Arvind Nitamji. Namaskar, sir. I have heard so much about you.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Namaskar, and your intervention on socio-economic development is legendary. So we are so happy that you are participating in the last session. Ulka is there, and I'm happy, Ulka, you are participating. And I just saw that you were at the TERI event and you were talking about workers and other issues. I hope to get similar interventions and better interventions, actually, from you on Just Transition at this platform. Hi, Mohit, long time. Thank you very much for coming, and I would like to hear from you what NTPC is thinking about. NTPC has a huge role to play in Just Transition in all the districts where NTPC has presence. And the coal secretary made that point that public sector will have a major role to play in Just Transition in the country. And lastly, but not the least, we have Dr. Crispian Oliver from South Africa. We have been closely watching South Africa. We want, this Glasgow deal that South Africa had with other developed countries on coal phase out is something that we have watched very closely. And I'm looking forward to your intervention, Dr. Oliver, for explaining to us what South Africa is thinking about Just Transition. तो मैं पहले अरविंद नितम जी से बोलूंगा, सर आपका पहला इंटरवेंशन हो इस सेशन में, आप अपनी बात पहले रखें. थैंक यू.
मैं हिंदी में करूं या इंग्लिश में करूं?
आपको जो कंफर्टेबल है सर, आप उसमें कहिए. आपकी बात सुनने के लिए लोग अभी तैयार हैं. आप हिंदी में बोलिए या अंग्रेजी में बोलिए.
ओके. थैंक यू चंद्रभूषण जी, एंड पैनलिस्ट को भी मैं बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं. मैं फॉर्मल अपनी बात कहूं उसके पहले आपको ये फोटोग्राफ्स जो आपने भेजा है कोरबा से रिलेटेड, ये सारी पिक्चर जो है ना, पूरी जो भविष्य की जो ट्राइबल पीपल की या अब कोल एरिया में काम करते हैं उनकी चिंता इसमें साफ दिखता है. पूरी बहस की जड़ इसी में है. आप इसको अपने ढंग से सोचिए. जिस फोटोग्राफर ने इसको लिया है मैं उसको थैंक्स करता हूँ. काइंडली कन्वे माय थैंक्स टू दैट फोटोग्राफ. So I come to my this formal comment. देखिए, मैं 25 साल पार्लियामेंट पे रहा, ऑलमोस्ट क्वार्टर years of my life in parliament, and I have visited so many areas in the parliamentary committee, and we are so serious about that rehabilitation and displacement in several public sector. Only thing is, if you look at this coal sector, coal ministry, according to me, that is the biggest ministry, that is the biggest problem created by the coal ministry to the tribal population in this country. If you must have studied the Jharkhand, old Jharkhand. I'm talking about undivided Jharkhand. What happened to that tribal people in that area? That you can examine. So my point is, of course, कोल मिनिस्ट्री या कोल इंडिया ने देश की निर्माण में, देश की तरक्की में बहुत काम किया. इसमें एनर्जी के बिना तो हो नहीं सकता. आई एम कंसर्न अबाउट दिस ट्राइबल पीपल ऑफ दिस कंट्री. जिसने सबसे ज्यादा डिस्प्लेस किया उसी ने किया है। और उस जमाने में रिहेबिलिटेशन का कोई प्लान गवर्नमेंट के पास था नहीं, इसीलिए आज सबसे ज्यादा परेशानी, और जितने भी कानून अब बने हैं या बन रहे हैं उसमें पेशा कानून भी महत्वपूर्ण है, और पेशा कानून का भी इस देश में इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं हो रहा है। सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत है कि पार्लियामेंट में जो कानून बने उस कानून का सरकार ही अगर इम्प्लीमेंट न करे तो उसका क्या इलाज है इस देश में। हमको इस बात का दुख होता है। पेशा कानून को बनाने में हम लोगों ने बहुत मेहनत किया था, पर आज आपको आश्चर्य होगा, रूल्स केवल 4 या 5 स्टेटों में बना है, बाकी किसी स्टेटों ने रूल्स फ्रेम नहीं किया। तो होगा कैसे? 27 साल हो गए, 27 साल में आधी यानी पीढ़ी निकल गई और इस कानून का कहीं अता पता नहीं है। और मुझे इस देश में देश के सरकार जो भी है, केंद्र की और राज्य सरकारों में मुझे शंका है, इस कानून को बिल्कुल लागू नहीं करने वाले हैं लोग, और ये कोल्ड स्टोरेज में डालने वाले हैं, जिससे सारा नुकसान इस देश के ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी को होने वाला है। तो मैं ये चाहता हूं कि ये जो बहुत से जो अनुभव है, अनुभव से सीखना चाहिए। रिहेबिलिटेशन आप कोरबा की, अच्छा, मैंने आपकी जो कमिटी है मैं उसको थैंक्स करता हूं कि आपने बहुत मेहनत किया है, पर कितने गांव उजड़े इसका कहीं जिक्र नहीं, अगर होगा तो हमें दे दे तो उसमें और हम आगे बोल सकते हैं। कितने फैमिलीज पूरे गांव के हुए, उसमें कितने ट्राइबल्स थे, कितने दूसरे थे, तो ये पता चले कि भी यानी क्या हो सकता है क्या नहीं हो सकता है। केवल आपने केवल संख्या दे दिया है वो एम्प्लॉयज की, उससे हमको अंदाज नहीं लगता। और मैं चंद्रभूषण जी एक आप कहना चाहता हूं, इस देश के जिला एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है ना, उनको पूछिए 5th शेड्यूल क्या होता है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का 5th शेड्यूल क्या होता है, पूछिए तो बोला कि, और उसमें क्या क्या पावर्स हैं या क्या क्या अधिकार हैं। अधिकांश डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को 5th शेड्यूल के बारे में पता नहीं है, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के बारे में पता नहीं है। तो क्या होगा इस देश में? यानी देश में इतने ट्राइबल एरिया है और अब मैंने वो इतने साल गुजर गए, अब मैं ये फिर ये आ गया है आपके ये जो पेशा कानून आ गया, अब फॉरेस्ट लैंड एक्ट आ गया, रिहेबिलिटेशन पॉलिसी आ गया, ये जो लैंड एक्विजिशन एक्ट आ गया, इतने कानून बन गए। अब करोगे क्या? मैं ये जानना चाहता हूं इस देश से कि आखिर एक कानून को लागू करोगे या फिर विकास करोगे? कहीं ना कहीं दोनों चीजें एक साथ नहीं हो सकता। ये बात जान लीजिए। या तो अगर पेशा कानून लागू करोगे तो आपके डेवलपमेंट में उसका इफेक्ट पड़ेगा। सरकार को इसको गंभीरता से बीच का रास्ता निकालना चाहिए, नहीं तो कन्फ्रंटेशन होगा। इस देश में आदिवासी 250 साल पहले अंग्रेजों से लड़े अपने जल जंगल जमीन के लिए, और आज भी लड़ रहे हैं। अगर इसमें भारत सरकार अगर कोताही की तो आप नोट कर लीजिए, फिर से इस देश में अब सरकार के खिलाफ आंदोलन होगा, और आंदोलन सारे देश में होगा ट्राइबल एरिया में। तो मैं ये चाहता हूं कि इसमें कहीं ना कहीं गंभीरता से भारत सरकार को करना चाहिए, नहीं तो ऐसा नहीं चलेगा। और आने वाला समय में मैं चाहता हूं कि बीच का कहीं ना कहीं रास्ता, हम चाहते हैं डेवलपमेंट हो, इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है, पर आदिवासी समाज का डेवलपमेंट की परिभाषा अलग है, सरकार की और बाकी लोगों की डेवलपमेंट की परिभाषा अलग है। ये दोनों परिभाषा अलग अलग है। और ट्राइबल की बात, तो ट्राइबल की परिभाषा को कौन जानता है, कौन जानने की कोशिश करता है? पेशा कानून में इस देश में कहा गया है कि जमीन कहीं भी लिया जाएगा तो पंचायत के कंसेंट से, सहमति से होगा। और आपको आश्चर्य होगा, छत्तीसगढ़ में आज तक 20 साल बने, एक भी प्रोजेक्ट का कंसेंट आपके आदिवासी पंचायत से, ग्राम सभा से हुआ नहीं है। तो ये होगा क्या? तो ये मैं आपसे कहना चाहता हूं। और इन सब चीजों को बहुत गंभीरता से अगर आप सरकार तक पहुंचा सकें तो तो अच्छी बात है, नहीं तो कहीं ना कहीं ये चीजें अड़चने आएंगी, अड़ंगे आएंगी। मैं यही कहना चाहता हूँ।
धन्यवाद अरविंद जी। और मैं कुछ सवाल बाकी पैनलिस्ट के बाद मैं आपके पास फिर से आऊंगा कुछ सवाल।
जरूर 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 जरूर।
So can I now, Dr. Oliver, I'm going to come last to you because I want you to, I understand that you will give a short presentation on South Africa. So let me go through my Indian colleagues and then I'll come back to you. So Ulka, your remarks, please.
Thank you very much, CB, and of course, big congratulations and compliments to the iForest team on this report. You know, about 20 years ago, I had gone to Chhattisgarh for field work on how farmers are affected by climate change, and it coincided with what is called Nautapa, the 9 days of the year when it is the hottest. And we got a sense of how people over there are already vulnerable to existing climate risks. Plus, the impacts of climate change are growing. We have a new report from the IPCC expected at the end of this month. And we already know from the last IPCC report that there is growing recognition that it's not just a one-off event, but compound and cascading extreme events. Just like we had during the pandemic when we had a locust attack, a cyclone, and a pandemic all at the same time and all interacting with each other. So the first point I wanted to make is that these are vulnerable communities that you are drawing attention to. They're marginalized communities. And the issue of this low carbon energy transition will be an additional stress on top of all the other stresses that are being faced by them. I wanted to actually, with the model that we have, we explore two different scenarios of phasing down coal for the country as a whole. I mean, how fast can we go? One option is to phase down coal by, say, around 2050. Another option is try to do it faster and try to phase out coal by, say, the early 2040s. And we find that there are direct effects, of course, on the jobs. In the 2050 phase out scenario, there will be 1.1 million coal sector jobs, coal mining jobs, specifically, that will be lost. In the more aggressive scenario, you would have 1.5 million coal mining jobs lost and 500,000 jobs lost in this decade alone. So this has major implications for the ability of the government to provide safety nets or some other form of compensation. On the positive side, of course, you have water savings. So thermal power plants use up a lot of water compared to solar plants. So we find that right now, 2.5 billion cubic meters of water are being used all over the country by coal-based power plants. And most of this can be saved if we switch to solar. There will be health benefits, of course, something like a total of 9 million premature deaths avoided over the period of the next 30 years if we were to have this phase down of coal. So definitely there are positives and negatives to be planned for, but there are specific choices also to be made. For example, the choice between phasing out coal by 2040 versus 2050 has another financial implication. If you were to replace coal by renewable energy, how would you balance the grid? Would you invest in a lot of battery storage? This, according to our calculations, would require something like $35 billion in just this decade. Or would you invest in natural gas peaker plants in order to provide grid flexibility? This is the kind of choice which we have to make. Do we manage to get the additional financing? Or do we create perhaps a legacy infrastructure of natural gas, which we don't really require in later decades and which might in fact crowd out renewable energy or battery storage in the decade of the 2040s. The final sort of point that I would really like to make is that, along with all this, and this has been highlighted very well in your report, that the dependence on fossil fuel tax revenues is so high in our country. For the center as a whole, of the national government as a whole, it's 25% of our tax revenues. But for states like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, and for districts of the sort that you mentioned, the coal royalties are so crucial in terms of the government's ability to invest in education and health. So the kind of just transition deal that South Africa and other countries have really created with political leadership from the absolute top are really going to be very important for making this a success. For the district specifically, what I would argue is that we need to look at the next generation and providing opportunities for economic diversification. And this need not be only energy sector green jobs, there can even be land-based green jobs around the restoration economy, the land restoration economy. So we really need to think of it from the perspective of women in particular. Can we provide them with decent jobs? And I know these are very difficult issues, and I certainly don't have any answers. All I can do is really just draw attention to some of these challenges, and perhaps learn from examples, from other countries, from other parts of our country. But as people working on climate change policy, I think what we always hold ourselves responsible for is that we have existing inequities and vulnerabilities in our economy and our society. If climate action is going to worsen these inequities, or if it is going to worsen the resource scarcities or make vulnerable people more vulnerable, then that is not just climate action. That's not fair or equitable climate action. So we have to have additional policies in place to make sure that the low carbon transition is also a just transition. So let me end with that for now, CB, and come back later. Thanks.
Thanks, Ulka. In fact, when we were reviewing what kind of legal reforms will be required, I think we will need a whole load of legal reforms in just transition, from land law itself, who the land will belong to post mine closure, for example, for repurposing of infrastructure. There is a large set of legal reforms that will be required, because so far the idea that a plant will be forced closed, for example, because of climate change, hasn't come into the legal domain. And both from land, labor, infrastructure, finance, there will be a list of legal reforms that will be required. Now, I want to go to Mohit. Mohit is now looking at greening NTPC, and I want to hear him. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and Chandrabhushanji and Shrestha, thanks a lot for having me here. I still had a question for Shrestha, whether I'm actually the right person to be on the panel when you're talking about so many things happening on the climate change side and greening. But yes, she said, since I am, heading the renewable vertical, probably I might make some sense for this very August forum.
Yes, that's what I told you.
Yeah, so let me try and make some sense of the discussions. First and foremost, I think congratulations on coming out with a very good report. I must honestly confess, I have only gone through half of it, but still it does make a lot of points which are very valid. So let me first try to connect with what Ulka said. Climate transition, energy transition, low carbon economy. I think these are no longer questions, these are imperatives. So probably that could be one of the starting points, because if we want to try to compare having more and more coal-based power plants vis-a-vis more and more green power plants and how to move forward, I think that debate we are well past the debate. So that has to happen. We are committed, the world is committed. And as far as NTPC is concerned, what we did in the last 4 decades in terms of building a large capacity, for those who are not fully aware about NTPC, we have about 67 gigawatts of operational capacity, out of which only about a very small capacity is actually non-fossil fuel based, about 10%. But going forward in the next 10 years, we actually want to create a renewable or a non-fossil based capacity. And when I say non-fossil, it's mainly renewable. That will be almost equal in size to what we have on the fossil fuel side. So 40 years of coal-based, transitioning to another 10 years of renewables. So that's the ask which I have been given in the management parlance. That's my KPA or whatever you want to call it. So that's what we need to move on. We have made good progress on that, and 2 or 3 things which have happened very clearly as far as NTPC is concerned. Although we still have a few coal-based plants under construction, but in the last 5 years, for example, we have actually not given the notice to proceed for any new coal-based plant. On the other hand, we've actually moved forward significantly on the renewable side. So we have close to about 7.5 gigawatt of renewables in the pipeline, including what is commissioned, plus what is under construction and where we have already won the bids. So our journey down the energy transition pathway is already laid out. We have the number 60 gigawatt by 2032, what we want to achieve. And this is a number which we'll probably review at the end of another 3 to 4 years and see how we are moving forward. A lot of advantages going down the renewable pathway. And this here again is not something we need to devote too much time to. Obviously, carbon, moving away from carbon dioxide emissions, moving to more cleaner sources of energy. And we feel that renewable and various options arising out of renewables, whether it is green hydrogen, green ammonia, green methanol. So we feel all of these would play a very important role going forward. And I really would like to also add to what Ulka said about the water saving. Obviously, I mean, once we're moving from a coal-based journey to a renewable-based journey, the amount of water saving is significant. But more than that, we also feel that it is something in terms of carbon dioxide emissions and avoided emissions, which will happen much more significantly. And for a lot of people who live in Delhi and the NCR, pollution is, we are probably, everyone says, although I'm not a smoker, that we are actually breathing in close to some, 10 cigarette packs per day kind of thing. So probably it's happening. And if someone does an X-ray of my lungs, they'll be pretty black in color. That's what I assume. So these are things we're all facing up to. On the just transition side, I have been on record in a couple of other forums also. This is actually very close to what NTPC is doing. But in terms of what your report says and what we are doing, there might be still some areas where we are probably not converging in entirety. We're not questioning what you say. So for us, there are maybe 2 or 3 layers. One part we had always been involved with in terms of CSR, which keeps on continuing. It doesn't take away anything from what we are doing. And along with that, would also what we have done, albeit not very, clearly laid out roadmap earlier, that we invested a lot in developing, for example, the ITI, the Industrial Training Institutes. And NTPC, probably other than the government, I don't have a verified number here, but probably we are one of those entities who actually set up the largest number of ITIs outside of the government. And we also have in the Koba district, I'm sure your people would have covered that. Incidentally, we also invested in the triple IT at Raipur. I'm not saying these are the best answers to what we are trying to do, but unintentionally at first, and now probably more focused manner now, we are trying to see how we can actually reskill the people as we move forward. Because the number of jobs which will probably start coming down, and it's of course not going to happen in the next 2 years. Coal, as we also anticipate, will be around maybe 2040, 2050. That appears the way we are working out. Government is actually working on that plan. So a lot of jobs will be there, but these numbers will keep on shifting drastically. And it's a no-brainer that the number of people employed on the renewable side is actually a very small percentage of what the number of people are involved on the coal-based side. So whether it's coal mining or a power plant. So both of these sides, the number of jobs which will have to shift from power plant operation per se will be a huge number. And when we talk about the next generation, there's going to be an even bigger number. So we feel that this is one of the small examples which we can take forward and how we can reskill the people, not for jobs in power plants, but for jobs. So a lot of these ITIs are actually focused on, giving people training on the trades, on the mechanical side, electrical side, and even for example, on the computer side. So a lot of these guys will actually be prepared for a role on that side of the business, which will not be directly related to what we're doing on the power sector side. The other part which probably resonates with us is also the repurposing. And I'll give a quick example. We actually shut down Badarpur in 2018. And this was not because we wanted to, we were literally asked to, even though, and we are still on record on that, Badarpur at that point of time was, in terms of emissions, the best power plant NTPC had, because it had all the fitments in place. A lot of other plants are actually still doing it. But anyway, so that issue apart, because it was in the heart of Delhi, it was the lowest hanging fruit for all the people and the stakeholders involved, and Chandrabhushan, I see, smiling away. So this was done in 2018. What we have done there is we are actually developing an eco park. And in terms of size, that's an 800 acres of greenery we are creating there. This is actually larger than the Central Park in New York. So I don't know how many people have gone there. I've been there only once. So it will be larger than that. The whole idea is to develop And one of the things which we had proposed to the government, because we actually don't own the piece of land, we told them that if you do this, we are creating green lungs for the capital. A lot of pollution and everything happening. So this is something which will help. So this is not a standard solution we are saying will happen everywhere, but this is one of the solutions which can be considered. The other is slightly longer term, and I heard with interest, I joined slightly late, you were talking about how to repurpose the coal mines. One of the things we have been talking to the government over a long period of time is, why don't you hand over the large voids of the open cast mines to people like NTPC so that we have locations to dump our ash? And we have done 1 or 2 projects where we have actually converted the ash mound into a total green belt. Koba being one small example. I don't know how many people of you have actually visited our Dadri power station. There, the ash, where we are disposing of the ash, we are continuously converting that into a green zone. So it has a lot of trees, and we have done a lot of work, and we were helped a lot there by IIT and so on and so forth. So that's another of the examples which can be taken forward. The amount of land with power plant is much smaller compared to, for example, a coal mine where the amount of land becomes much larger. But we feel that contrary to what was being discussed here, the mine closure plan has to be decided upfront. We don't see it being decided 10 years down the line. It probably should be a part of when we are getting the mine plan approval. Then itself, we should either identify clearly, either we start setting aside some money, or we need to work out the broad contours of how the mine closure will happen and how that land can be purposed. Now, incidentally, NTPC also has 3 operating coal mines, and that is what we plan to do there. Of course, all these mines are expected to continue, operating for the next 25 years. So it'll be well past when I'm around to actually take a look, and many of you, but I'm sure a lot of people would still be there. Maybe Manvi would still be around to take a look at what happens in 2045 kind of scenario. So that is what we feel. So probably I'll stop here. This is because this is a good debate and good discussion. I'm here more to listen and understand what your ideas and something which we can take back home. So Chandrabhushan ji, happy to contribute more, but for the moment I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohit. Repurposing is going to be equally important for NTPC simply because you have already built the infrastructure. And we have looked at some of the repurposing issues for NTPC plants as well. And some of those issues we have discussed in the report. But I'll come back to you with a few questions. But before that, I'll now request our colleague from South Africa for his presentation. Dr. Oliver, your presentation, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and a very good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I must say, it's been fascinating listening to all of the debates and the discussions and the different inputs. I mean, the one thing I can tell you is that we are going through precisely the same debates here in South Africa. And the politics around the energy transition is very live. We have people lined up on both sides of the debate. We have, the big issue for us is the pace at which we decarbonize and what the future looks like for our coal mining areas. And I want to show you a few slides, if I may, just to highlight the point for you. This is me. This is the organization I represent. We are a multi-stakeholder commission. We were set up by the president a year ago. And I am the executive director. I basically run the commission. For us, the just transition is the key to the whole climate transition. It's in a sense, a foundational position for our policy work. We've put it into the draft legislation that's in front of our parliament. So, and we define it as a shift to low carbon, climate resilient, and ecologically sustainable economy and society, with the goals of decent work for all, social inclusion, and the eradication of poverty. And we pull out three aspects of justice that we focus on. The one is procedural justice, which is about including people that are most affected by the transition in decision-making around it. We talk about distributive justice, which is making sure that there's a fair distribution of climate risks and the resources and opportunities to respond to those risks. And we talk about restorative justice, which is about the measures and the transitional arrangements we put in place to compensate impacted groups and make sure that they have jobs and livelihoods into the future. And we're right now, I mean, as we speak, we're in the process of putting the policy framework on the table for this. We're calling it a framework for the just transition, and it's meant to be a practical guide with some short and medium-term policy interventions. This is a map of our country which shows you where our coal mining areas are. I mean, we're, like you, blessed, blessed and cursed with one. I think our coal fields are, they're certainly amongst the largest in the world. There's this vast area to the east of Johannesburg, and it underlies the Mpumalanga province and parts of the northern province, Limpopo and KwaZulu-Natal, also in the Free State and some in the Eastern Cape. And our energy model for decades, I mean, for at least the last 50, 60 years, you know, we build these huge coal-fired power stations on top of coal mines, and we burn that coal to make our power. And that has resulted in probably, I think we are, if you look at the carbon intensity of our exports, we are certainly amongst the most intensive in the world. The carbon intensity of our exports is about twice that of China, and it's 75% more than yourselves. And that is a risk. The focus at the moment, and one of the big debates, is how much of an economic risk that places on us. And, you know, we're following what our trading partners, particularly our friends in the EU, are doing. I mean, you know, everyone's been signing up to net zero commitments, as have you, as have other developing countries, and as have us. And we're seeing those commitments being followed through with some form of attempt to prevent carbon leakage. I mean, the EU is talking about their carbon border tax adjustment mechanism. The US is coming up with some other arrangement. But in one form or another, there is a carbon price that will be injected into the world economy. And what we don't want is to be left at the, you know, end of the transition, having to make an extremely painful adjustment and facing mass unemployment and you know, a declining, uncompetitive economy. So, you know, we've been fairly bold in thinking how to respond to this. Our focus is on getting our economy to net zero somewhere around mid-century. I know you've got a net zero target for 2070, China for 2060. We think we're going to need to be net zero earlier than that. Certainly in terms of carbon, other greenhouse gases, we can talk about getting to net zero at a later date. And we've modeled this very carefully. I mean, we've looked at economic impact, we've looked at what's a feasible trajectory. And you would have noticed in our latest NDC, we came up with a more ambitious, it's a range of emissions, which is between 420 and 350 megatons of CO2 per annum. Cabinet adopted our recommendations in the build-up to COP26. This is the practical implications of that trajectory up to 2035. So, we're intending, we have a whole raft of coal-fired power stations that are ending their useful economic life. They are now falling below a 40% utilization rate, and it's uneconomic for us to keep running those coal-fired power stations. It's costing more on maintenance and repair, and we now have air quality provisions being imposed. So it's actually going to pay the country to pull those power stations off. And you can see the rate along the bottom at which we have to decommission our coal-fired power stations. And on the top, you can see what we're needing to replace it with. And we've mapped out, we've got incredible renewable resources in the country. Like some of the best solar, very good wind resources. We need to balance the grid with gas, and we don't yet have utility scale batteries at the level that'll be coming in the 2030s. So certainly now, 2020s, early 2030s, we're going to be needing a big slug of gas. And we're overbuilding on that. So we're doing 50 gigawatts of new capacity to replace the 22 gigawatts that are being pulled off in terms of our generation. This is going to have employment effect. And, I've shown you here on the slide, we've got different models that we use. The one on the left has been done by the National Business Initiative. And you can see the red bars on the bottom, which is where we're going to be shedding jobs in the coal value chain and also petrochemicals. But the good news is that, with an aggressive renewable rollout and the minerals for the green economy, we've got really excellent, copper, vanadium, iron and steel are still going to be needed, cobalt, molybdenum, rare earths. We think we can get a net positive jobs impact. But that is going to be unevenly spread, and there are going to be regional impacts that we're unable to mitigate with jobs growth in other parts of the country or other sectors. So we're very actively now engaged in planning for those regional impacts and how to manage this transition process. And there are four broad areas that we're looking at. The one is governance, and we're designing the regional and local development agencies and mechanisms that we need. We're putting in place the mechanisms for public engagement and participation. So not just in the commission that I run, but how do we do this at a regional and a local level, and do it in partnership with regional and local authorities. Also, we're trying to find ways of leveraging in our social partners, particularly the business community, and building on their capacity. And we're extremely interested in mobilizing the funding to drive this. So, there's been a lot of funding into the climate space, mainly for mitigation, a little bit for adaptation, very little for just transition. So we're really working now flat out on the just transition financing mechanisms. And we want to be able to track and measure impact and success. And then there are a whole range of labor market interventions that we're working on. So, how do we create the skills for the labor force of the future? So where is the labor force going to be in 2030, 2040, 2050? And what's the skills pipeline we need for that? What are the employment incentives and the job placement schemes that we need to put in place for that transition? How do we support small and local businesses? Because that's where they're far more labor intensive than some of the large corporates. And how do we prioritize workers for support? Because there are 100,000 workers in the coal sector. Which ones do we focus on immediately? Which ones do we focus on towards 2025 or 2030? And then we're looking at economic diversification measures. So, you know, which are the sectors that we got to target? What are the tax incentives and other economic incentives that we've got to put in place to drive that? What's the infrastructure we need? Particularly, you know, we're seeing a big play in hydrogen. We already produce quite a lot of grey hydrogen in our economy. We see a big opportunity in green hydrogen in the future. So how do we create the transport infrastructure? I mean, it's very difficult to move around, and also the export machinery and the infrastructure and the ports for that. And then, of course, we don't want this all to be driven by, you know, established white-owned businesses. For us, economic empowerment is key to this process. So how do we involve local and Black-owned businesses? And then, you know, lastly, there's some workers that, you know, we're not going to be able to find employment, or coal workers and coal truckers who, you know, might be in their 50s and, you know, are unlikely to be able to be transitioned into new jobs. So there we're actively looking at the types of welfare and unemployment support we've got to put in place. We're having a very active debate now around income support and a basic income grant. We're also having to debate the period of income support. So, you know, how long is this? How do we factor it into our fiscal planning? And what's the age cutoff for early retirement mechanisms? So, you know, that's, and all of these areas are, I can tell you, very active debates. We don't have, you know, I'm not coming to you with a set of answers in each of these areas. This is what's being put together in the framework that I mentioned earlier. So this is my last slide. You know, this feeds into a broader repositioning that's happening around the climate agenda in South Africa. We've traditionally seen it very much as an environmental agenda, and, you know, we've got fairly good mitigation and adaptation planning around it. What's happening far more is the economic ministries are much more involved in the debate. We're having a very active engagement around, you know, can we afford this macroeconomically? What's the trade and industrial and labor market policy we need? How do we get the financial regulations and the climate risk disclosure moving? How do we tweak the carbon pricing and the tax policy that we've got? What's the whole public finance strategy around this? And how do we link that to the social development agenda and our social safety nets and HRD strategy? So it's, you know, it's really interesting times. I mean, you know, we've seen the climate agenda now become really a core economic issue in the country. And that's good. You know, in some respects for the environmentalists, they're feeling like they've got to now refight the argument with a whole range of economic and social and development ministries. But what is happening is that it's mainstreaming climate into the core development strategy of the country. So just closing words from my side, you know, we would love to keep an ongoing engagement with yourselves. We're partners in this. We're up against, you know, a common set of geopolitics. We need to be coordinating closely as we move forward with this transition, and we really value these opportunities to engage. So thank you very much from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver. One of the things that, you know, it has gone into cold storage, but there was a basic group of countries which negotiated together. The forum still exists on climate change. It was started by our ex-environment minister, Jairam Ramesh, before Copenhagen conference. But I think basic group now needs to come together to discuss actually the transition. So far, basic group was discussing how to negotiate the convention itself, international negotiations. But now, as you rightly said, the debate is moving towards transition, which means we will now have to discuss more and more economic and social issues. And if we can handle economic and social issue with technology that is available, we might be able to solve many of the environmental challenges that we face. Not all of them, mind you. Consumption still remains a fundamental environmental challenge. But apart from that, many of the environmental challenges we will be able to address. We have 15 minutes of Q&A, और मैं अरविंद नितम जी के पास जाऊंगा. अरविंद जी, मेरा पहला सवाल ये है कि जो भी अभी जो आदिवासियों को, ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी को जो प्रॉब्लम हुई है, वो कोयले के खादान खोलने के कारण, उनकी जमीन लेने के कारण, उनके रिहैबिलिटेशन ना होने के कारण हुई है. अब बात हो रहा है कोयले के खदान को बंद करने की. तो उस केस में क्या सेफगार्ड हमको रखना चाहिए ताकि जो ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी है, जिसने की जिंदगी भर जल, जमीन और जंगल से लड़ाई की है के मामले को लेके, किस तरह से हम ट्राइबल के इंटरेस्ट को सेफगार्ड करें जब हम कोयले के खदान को बंद करने की बात कर रहे हैं. अरविंद जी, आप म्यूट पे हैं, आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए.
आपने बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न किया है कि अब ये अच्छी बात है, मैं इसको वेलकम करता हूं कि कोयले के खदान अब धीरे धीरे बंदी हो रहे हैं. अब कोयले का खदान नया होगा नहीं, कम से कम डिस्प्लेसमेंट होने से बच जाएगा. आपने कहा कि जो भी इसमें लगे हुए हैं उनका भी अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट प्रॉब्लम होगा. ये बात सही है. मेरा इसमें है कि भारत सरकार के बहुत सी स्कीम है, राज्य सरकारों की स्कीम है, उसको सब इंटीग्रेटेड कर लीजिए. और दूसरी बात, जो खदानों को फिर से क्या वो वर्ड आपने यूज किया है,
रिपर्पसिंग बोला उसको,
रिपर्पसिंग के लिए, तो उन जितने भी हो उसको इन ट्राइबलों को भी स्कीम के साथ ही उनको अलॉटमेंट कर देना चाहिए, क्योंकि करीब करीब उन्हीं की जमीन है, वहीं से डिस्प्लेस हुए हैं और अपनी मूल धंधों से, तो उनको वहीं से कर लिया जाए. और फिर से उनको ये जो कह रहे हैं ना, हॉर्टिकल्चर है, ये है, वो है, जो भी है, अब टेक्नोलॉजी बहुत अब एडवांस होता जा रहा है, बहुत से एग्रीकल्चर में भी, हॉर्टिकल्चर में भी, बहुत से चीज में भी, तो उसको फिर से रिवाइव किया जा सकता है, इनको रिपर्पस कर करके. ये सबसे बढ़िया हो सकता है. अदरवाइज ट्राइबल को आप बहुत दूसरे और कोई तरीका दिखता नहीं, क्योंकि एक तो ये शिफ्ट नहीं होते अपने जगह से, अपने इलाके से दूर नहीं जा सकते. अगर कोई कहे कि हम दूर बसा देंगे तो ये चलेगा नहीं. तो मैं चाहता हूं कि इसमें रिपर्पस करके उसको वही किया जाए, और जितने भी नई स्कीम है उनको ये इंटीग्रेटेड स्कीम बना करके उनको कैसे बेनिफिट दिया जाए, इस पे कम से कम लगनी चाहिए. और ये सुब्रमण्यम साहब एक बात कह रहे थे कि एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर में, क्योंकि मैं मिनिस्ट्री में काफी साल रहा है, तो मैंने काफी उसमें काम किया है, तो ये इस देश में सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत है कि हमने एग्रीकल्चर में खास करके पैडी में, जितना पैडी सेक्टर के इलाके में हमने बारीक चावल यानी पतला चावल के लिए ज्यादा काम किया है. कोर्स ग्रेन के लिए अभी तक कोई ज्यादा काम नहीं हुआ है. सुब्रमण्यम साहब थोड़े से जिक्र जरूर कर रहे थे कमीशन की, तो कोर्स ग्रेन ट्राइबल और जो पुअर पीपल का जो स्टेपल फूड है वो कोर्स ग्रेन है. अनफॉर्चुनेटली हम जो ये जो आपके कोरबा का ये इलाका है, जो सेमी फर्टाइल लैंड है, कोई बहुत ज्यादा नहीं है, ये कोर्स ग्रेन के लिए बहुत सुटेबल है. इसमें सरकार को काम करना चाहिए, ताकि ये नहीं तो इनकी सारी कंसंट्रेशन तो हाइब्रिड और इसमें उसमें लगा है, तो इसमें अगर कर ले कोर्स ग्रेन में, तो आज आपकी जो प्रॉब्लम कह रहे हैं ना, वो काफी हद तक हल हो जाएगा.
धन्यवाद अरविंद जी. उल्का, India has it is not discussing just transition. So far, it has not discussed just transition at UNFCCC. In fact, we did not engage with the negotiation that happened at UNFCCC on just transition. How do you see India, engaging itself with JT going ahead?
Tough question, CP. You probably have better answers than I do for questions like these. I think for India, something like just transition is so integrated into our way of life, into the nature of our economy, that it's a little kind of almost. I think it's one of those things that is left unsaid, that is just taken for granted. So I wouldn't take it to mean that the government is not interested or not prioritizing this. It's something like, it's like a fundamental part of any of the concerns that the government has raised. You may give it a different label. I think some people talk about it as the impact of response measures, or you may call it just transition. But I think it's very much a priority, and I think there's a lot of interest in learning, not just from the South African example, but the accelerating coal transitions, program of the World Bank, which is looking at countries like Indonesia also. There is also the initiative by the Asian Development Bank and other private sector banks, which are looking at buying out running coal power plants in countries like Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, simply in order to shut them down, even though they may not yet be shutting down on economic grounds alone. So this philanthropic money as well as multilateral donor money will come in and help to shut down some of these coal power plants. So I think there's a lot of interest in these various forums that are bringing this up. But I think while you have rightly highlighted the importance of government processes, I think some of the examples of what Mr. Bhargav, for example, gave of the ITIs is really something very important. I would like to give one more example from Ethiopia, where when the electricity utility basically adopted a renewable energy target, it also decided to look at the social aspects and say, who are we giving jobs to? And found that most of the jobs are going to men. There are very few women. So they set a target for that also, but found that there aren't enough women with the right kind of educational qualifications. So they went to the equivalent of our UGC, the higher education ministry, and said, let's create fellowships and internships for women in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. So sometimes, some things don't have to be restricted to particular ministries or to particular agencies, but if they can only speak to another agency within their mandates, a lot of interesting innovations can be created. Another example I would give is from Nigeria, where when they had their COVID recovery stimulus funds, they set aside 60% of the MSME recovery funds for women-led MSMEs. So again, within the ambit of what was kind of mainstream, not a special just transition package or anything like that, but within existing processes, you can bring in these principles and make sure that you're also looking at the social aspects. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is there are many different ways to really to go forward. Thanks.
Mohit, I know NTPC is getting into renewable energy, but are you getting into renewable energy in areas where you have coal plants? Because you're in districts where your coal plant will close down. What is it that you're thinking about substituting it with? Hot seat.
That's actually a good point, which does not have a very clear answer now. You see, renewable energy projects would largely come in areas where the potential is good, because the objective is not just to put up a renewable energy plant, but to make it in a manner which is ultimately able to provide power in an affordable and reliable manner to whether there's a DISCOM or any other consumer. So typically what has happened is that most of the coal-based plants and the largest capacity, as you know, are in states like Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand, which incidentally do not have the best solar resources. So the capacity in these locations would be very limited. Having said that, we are definitely looking at, although incidentally, we have actually not reached that stage other than Badarpur, where we are actually looking at, shutting down the entire facility and moving everything out and do something new there. Because Badarpur is the example I gave. We also shut down, 2 units recently in Muzaffarpur, Kanti, but we already have 2 separate units running there. So only a small piece of land is now actually going to be available, which will probably take care of repurposing and, if possible, working out a solar plant. But that will be very small capacity. So like-for-like jobs obviously may not happen. And the number of jobs also will be much lower. I mean, other than the construction phase, when probably there will be a larger number of jobs. But once we enter the O&M phase for the life of the plant, the numbers will be much smaller, which is why we feel that reskilling has to be done in a manner which is not dependent on any particular sector. So whether it's a power sector, whether it's a coal mine job or a power sector job, and even wherever we have tried to do this, it's to prepare people to take on jobs of any kind, not necessarily directly linked to NTPC or for that matter, any other industry. And I'm sure the other guys are also looking at it in the same manner, because we can't actually employ all the people who are displaced, because the number of jobs are limited, the requirement will be much more. So that is always some kind of a, which is done in conversation with the district authorities and the state authorities, how we can take care of that. So that question, like you said, I mean, I don't have a ready-made a complete answer, but that's what it is right now.
I think we need to, one of the issues that is in my, as I have looked at the, criteria that MNRE and other agencies have used to estimate renewable energy, there has to be some certain changes in them, because I think they're underestimating renewable potential in Eastern and Central India. The kind of insulation we have in Eastern and Central India, it is as good as Germany overall. While, of course, Western and Southern India will have better potential, relatively better potential, but to say that Central and Eastern India don't have potential, because there are indicators and criteria they have used which is not very suitable for hilly areas. That's another topic, but
yeah. So if you permit, maybe I'll just quickly respond to that. We are not saying it does not have good insulation. Today, for example, if you're looking at, say, 500 gigawatt or 400 gigawatt number, out of which maybe 300 gigawatt would be solar capacity. So it is all becoming relative. The tariff which we are discovering, for example, in Rajasthan is, say, 2 rupees or 2 rupees 10 paisa, 20 paisa. For a similar capacity, which, for example, if I set up in Chhattisgarh or Orissa, the tariff would be significantly higher. So when we are looking today, what the states are doing, they are not very keen to sign up for a higher tariff, because they're already burdened. The discounts are already in a financial situation where they do not look at very high capacity or additional liabilities in terms of capacity tie-ups. So once we have exhausted that and maybe the tariff level increases, which may or may not happen in the near term, then probably what you're saying, the other angle which might actually push this change is also today the ISTS, the Interstate Transmission Waiver, has been given by the Government of India. The idea was to push the renewable capacity in the country. Once this is done away with, then probably the buy-in at state level will also increase. So we have done this analysis, and Chandrabhushan ji, I'll be happy to discuss this at length offline also with you and your team, because we are very keen to exploit whatever potential we have. Just one more point. What we've also done recently, that we've actually used we had acquired greenfield land also, for example, in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. So that we've already started changing to solar. So there was a project near Kanpur where we had acquired land. That was for a 1320 megawatt of coal-based plant. So that we've already converted, and we have a 225 megawatt solar plant operational there. Similarly, another location where we're looking at another maybe 2,600 megawatt plant, that also we are going to change to another 600 megawatt solar plant. So the dimensions would be less, the number would be less, but it can be done. On a larger scale, it will happen once this ISTS thing is probably done away.
I think we should discuss this, or Mohit, because otherwise the changing energy geography of India will become a reality, and we also have to understand what implications it will have on the of this country. But let me come to Dr. Oliver. We all have heard about this 8.5 billion deal that South Africa made with developed countries. Do you want to give us a little more detail on that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, let me preface my remarks on that by saying the cost of the energy transition is a lot more than 8.5 billion. I mean, we estimate that we're going to need in rands, R1 trillion up to 2035 and 3 trillion rands by 2050. The rand's at about 15 to the dollar at the moment. So you can do your calculations from that. So the offer we've received is a drop in the ocean compared to the aggregate energy investment requirements. And the figures I've given you do not factor in the just transition elements, which are going to impose a whole range of other fiscal burdens on us. So what is that 8.5 actually buy us? It is going to allow us to do some immediate upgrading to the grid. I mean, like you, the grid infrastructure that we've got is linked to the coal-fired power stations, mostly on the east of the country. And our renewable resources, particularly solar, are to the west and the north. So we've got to reconfigure our grid to take advantage of that. It's partly, by the way, I was fascinated by your debate on repurposing coal-fired power stations. We're doing that a lot because we've got a lot of sunk, assets, existing grid infrastructure linked to the coal-fired power stations. And even though the renewables is not quite as good, we can still repurpose them. So we're funding a bit of that repurposing out of the 8.5. And we're then also trying to massively ramp up the peaking plant capacity, batteries, gas storage, pumped storage, to be able to balance this amount of renewables onto the grid. So that's the basic package. I mean, it really only allows us to get, the ball rolling. It's not the full financing of the transition. It certainly is not, the developed countries have got a much larger obligation in terms of funding the just transition in all of our countries. We've contributed the least to the problem. This is a consequence of centuries of, industrial development in the developed north. I mean, that's what's driving climate change. And at the moment, we're now trying to put the details to this deal. And there's a little bit of a, push and shove going on because, how much of it is actual real grant money, how much of it is, blended money, and there's a lot of discussion and negotiation going on around it. I mean, all we've received at the moment is a promise. We're drilling into that promise to, try and see how real it is, and work out some very practical issues around the terms, the timeframes, the conditionalities, the concessionality, etc.
Thank you. I think we have reached 5:30 India time. We have a hard stop here, but I just want all of you to open your video if we can. We wanted to release report for each panel. I'm sure, Mohit, you have the report with you?
Oh, incidentally, I don't have it here.
Okay, Ulka, you have?
I asked for a soft copy, so let me get my phone. Yeah.
Nevertheless, we wanted to do this, but we will do it some other time. Report has been released in any case at the inaugural session. So thank you very much. We had a fascinating discussion today. I just want to take 2 minutes to summarize. One, that in 2022, we are not discussing whether we should do it or not. We are discussing how we should do it. I think that's a big leap that has happened in India. In 2021, we were discussing whether we should or not. So I think the debate has completely changed, and I think the details will keep coming out. More research institution, Niti Aayog, other institution will keep working on this issue. Our report is the first report, but I'm sure many more reports will come out on how this transition should happen. We have put out our thoughts, but these are not something which is written in stone. Many more institutions will bring out more ideas, better ideas, and we look forward to that. More institution needs to work on the issue of transition, because we are now talking about how do we change the country. Just transition is not about dealing only with climate crisis. It is about dealing with people. How will people respond? How they will be taken care of? How the natural resources will be managed. But overall, we at iForest believe it is an excellent opportunity to do things better than what we have done for 100 years. Just transition means that we can do things in a much more socially and environmentally sustainable manner in coal areas. As Arvindji said, that the history of coal in this country has not been really a pleasant history. Displacement, dispossession has been the root of the story. But we have an opportunity to actually in many ways reverse some of those things, do things better. This is what just transition is all about as far as we are concerned. We have put out a framework. I'm sure many institutions will revise, improve on that framework. We will continue to work on just transition. Shrestha and her team are working through India Just Transition Center. We are engaging with Niti Aayog, Ministry of Coal, as well as with state governments. Look forward to engaging with all of you. You should look forward to our reports, which is going to come out in future. Thank you very much and for this. And with this, I will hand over to Shrestha to end the program.
Thank you, CV. Thank you, everyone, for staying back. Of course, the numbers dipped, but it was a fascinating participation today. And I would like to thank you all, in fact, for the kind of inputs we receive at end of our every meetings. I mean, Ulka has part of our consultation meetings a lot of time. And we don't see, I personally don't see this report as any end. It's an opportunity to refine our work better. And we hope we'll come up with a better research the next time, which is more fascinating with all your support. And we have more enriching discussions because in fact, today's sitting, I was jotting down so many points that research. And I keep on telling to CV every day that this is a topic which is mind-boggling because it involves everyone. It involves economists, it becomes power sector experts, it becomes social scientists, everyone you can think, coal industry, community, ground workers. So it is something that can't be dealt alone. And we honestly look forward to work around all of you to take this forward. And thank you very much for your time today, patiently being with us for 3.5 hours. And I hope you have taken back something. We have taken back a lot from this meeting today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.